Gift of the Parsis, Les Parsis by Menant, translated in part by the late Miss Ratanbai, Ardeshir, Vakil, London, printed for private circulation 1902. CAHPENTIGA. Contents page. Introduction. 9. Chapter I. The Exodus of the Parsis. I-2. The Zoroastrians in Persia. 38.3. Population, Costumes, Usages, Festivals. 77. Introduction. As special interest attaches to this translation into English of Menant's monograph entitled Les Parsis, arising from the circumstance that it is, in great part, the work of a Parsi lady, the late Miss Ratanbai, Ardeshir, Vakil. I have still a vivid recollection of the morning in the beginning of the year 1886 on which Mr. Ardeshir F. Vakil, senior partner in one of the leading firms of solicitors in Bombay, brought his two daughters Meherbay and Ratanbai to the Wilson College to begin their career as students of the Bombay University. Although for many years that university had prefaced its regulations with the sentence, "In the following regulations the pronoun he and its derivatives are used to denote either sex," and had thus opened its doors wide to the ex-introduction women of India, only one lady student had been enrolled as undergraduate in arts before these two sisters entered upon their college career. The experiment which was then made awakened some anxieties. Would it be possible for Indian ladies to study in a mixed college class? How would the men be likely to conduct themselves in the new situation? These were questions which naturally presented themselves. The result of the experiment disappointed from the beginning all such fears. From the first day the presence of these ladies elevated the tone and discipline of the college class in a manner most creditable to the ladies and to the men. The success of this experiment paved the way for the admission during subsequent years of an increasing number of lady students to the privileges of a university education, who are under no small obligation to the courage and character displayed by these two sister pioneers. They both came to the university under the impulse of a real love of learning, and their success in the pursuit of it was assured from the beginning. In this prefatory note I confine myself to the career of the younger sister. The elder, after her graduation as Bachelor of Arts in Bombay, Introduction 11, entered upon a course of medical study which led her ultimately to London and Glasgow. From the Glasgow University she received the degrees of MB, CM, and is now exercising her profession in her native city. The younger sister, Ratanbai, never left home. The strength of her attachment to her home in Bombay was quite remarkable. She found little enjoyment even in those temporary absences from Bombay during the hot season vacation which proved so attractive to many. Her life moved in two spheres, the college and her home, and these two sufficed. Born in December 1869, she was a girl of 16 when she entered upon her studies for her degree. She passed through the ordinary curriculum of study, which included English and French literature, mathematics, elementary science, history, and logic. The subjects in which she was specially interested were English and French literature. French was recognized by the university as one of the languages which might be studied in the course for the degree of Bachelor of Arts when she entered upon her studies, and she was one of the first to select this language. She had as her instructor the late Signor Pedraza, a gentleman whose name 12 introduction will always be associated with the history of the progress of French studies in Western India. Under his competent guidance she acquired a great love for French literature, and found in this side of her studies much mental enjoyment. In 1890 she passed her examination for the degree with honors, and was immediately thereafter elected to a fellowship in the college. This also was a new and interesting experiment, amply justified by its results. As a Daxhina Fellow she taught the French classes in the college, and had as her pupils not only young ladies but also young men. When the period of her fellowship expired she continued her connection with the college and remained in charge of the French classes, performing a highly valued service on the merely nominal salary of a fellow of an Indian college. She maintained her connection with the college simply from love to the college and the work. During her college career both she and her sister had given evidence of their unselfishness by declining, on more than one occasion, scholarships to which their position in the university examinations would have entitled them, in order that poorer students less high in the lists might have the benefit of the aid and rewards which Introduction 13 they were willing to forego. Ratanbai showed the same spirit of generosity during all the years of her connection with the college, and every student movement that needed financial aid could always reckon on her liberal help. In the truest sense, her work in the Wilson College was a labor of love. She continued this work up to the time of that last sad illness which ended so rapidly in her lamented death. So quickly did she succumb that I knew of her serious illness only a few hours before she passed away. I shall not readily forget the grief of her home when the shadow of death was falling upon it, nor the gloom which entered when she passed out of it. It was indeed as if all its light and joy had perished. One could see how the education and culture of women, instead of creating a cleft in the life of the family, as is so often erroneously imagined by those who oppose the cause of female education in India, proves a means of strengthening its unity and elevating its whole character. In this respect Ratanbai was exercising an influence greater than she knew on the prospects of education amongst her countrywomen, by disarming all such suspicions and by proving 14 introduction in her own person the essential compatibility of the higher culture with the best domestic virtues. She never felt tempted by her love of books to neglect her duties as a daughter and a sister in the home, or, if she did, she overcame the temptation completely. Her influence on college students was of the same quiet, unobtrusive character, and, for that reason, all the more real. When she died, the students of the college felt themselves bereaved of a true friend. Spontaneous movement on their part to found a memorial of her in the college awakened a general response, and the Ratanbai collection of French works placed in the college library was the result. Through the efforts of friends outside the college who admired her character and attainments, a scholarship fund was raised in her memory, and the college awards every year scholarships to women students on this foundation. During a brief career she was enabled to illustrate by a singularly modest and unassuming life the power and the lasting influence of unselfish service. The truest mark of her unselfishness was her own unconsciousness of it. By look and manner she seemed continually to deprecate Introduction 15 all commendation or praise. Unselfish devotion to duty in the two spheres of life to which she belonged, her home and her college, was the outstanding feature of the brief but happy career which closed so suddenly when Ratanbai passed away in 1895, at the early age of 26, and because of this her memory remains. The unfinished manuscript now completed and published will be welcomed by many who knew and esteemed the writer, as well as by all in whom the perusal of this volume awakens an interest in the ancient race to which she belonged. Wilson College, Bombay, May, 1902. D. Maki-chan. The Parsis Chapter I. The Exodus of the Parsis. The Parsis are the descendants of the ancient Persians, whose fame has survived in the annals of the world. Reduced henceforth to perhaps the most restricted minority amongst all the nations of the globe, they are found dispersed all over the Presidency of Bombay, and in some districts of modern Persia, in Yezd and in Kerman, where they have been vegetating for centuries. The Bible, 1. The classical historians, 2. National traditions, 3. An epigraphical documents. 1. The first mention of the Persians is made in Jeremiah XXXIX. 3. 2. Herodotus, Tisias, Dianon, Theopompa, Hermop, Plutarch, Diogenes Laertius, Pliny, Strabo, Pausanias, Dion Chrysostom, Damascius, Theodorus of Mopsuestia, and c. 3 Mahomedan writers, Ferdowsi, Merkhoud, Taberi, Masudi, Shahrastani, Dimiski, Ibn Fozlan, and c. Armenian writers, Esnik, Elisi, and c. The Parsis recently brought to light by European savants give us some information concerning their history. Pars represents in our days the little province of Parsua, which has given its name to one of the greatest civilizations of antiquity. It is bounded on the west by Sujana, on the north and on the east by the deserts of Khabur and Kerman, with a coastline along the Persian Gulf between Bushire and Bandar Abbas. In ancient times the inhabitants, divided into tribes, led a simple, rustic life, superior in all respects to their neighbors the Medes, already enervated by civilization. Between the ages of 5 and 20, says Herodotus, the young Persians are taught three things: to mount the horse, to stretch the bow, and to speak the truth, Cleo, Thirsi. It was amongst them, and amongst the Bactrians, that the principles of the Zoroastrian religion had been maintained in all their purity. With Cyrus, the descendant of Achaemenes, the real history of Persia begins. He founded the dynasty of the Achaemenides, which lasted for one. The cuneiform Achaemenian inscriptions found in Persia and in other places, deciphered and published by Grotefend, Bernoulli, Lassen, Rawlinson, Norris, Spiegel, de Salcy, Oppert, Menant, Kosowis, and c. the exodus of the Parsis 2 centuries, and attained by its conquests a degree of splendor of which we find unmistakable traces everywhere. It was at Arbela l. 331, that Alexander overthrew Darius, the last prince of this dynasty, and, on his death, Persia was numbered amongst the countries that had passed under the subjection of the Seleucid Set. In 225 BC, Arsas, of the province of Parthia, revolted against Antiochus Theos, and laid the foundations of a new empire. The dynasty of the Arsacides reigned until a Persian prince of somewhat inferior birth, Ardeshir, founded in his turn a national dynasty, viz., that of the Sassanides, 226 AD. The Romans were its constant enemies. However, the real danger revealed itself only with the advent of the Arabs, who, approaching nearer and nearer, had already conquered several provinces when King Yezdeserd made preparations for resistance. The first invasion took place under Caliph Omar II, 633. Khalid ben Walid at the head of one Areen, Expedition T. Alexandra, Liv. 3, Ci. 2 Ve, Geschichte Kali /N Nachhandschrift, Großtentheils Quellen, and C, ch2. Pages 54 etseq, Mannheim, 1864. Cossin de Perceval, Histoire des Arabes, Liv. 9 p. 400, 1848. Malcolm, Hist. of Persia, from the most early period to the present time, Vol. IC 6. p. 170, London, MDCCCXV. For the Parsis 10,000 men, and Mozanna at the head of 8,000, had marched against Hormuz, the Persian governor of Iraq, and had vanquished him. After this victory Khalid had gone forward and conquered Iraq, but he was defeated at the Battle of Marwaha, 634. 4,000 Mussulmans were killed, and 2,000 returned to Medina. Unfortunately the Persian general Biman did not follow up this advantage. The country was at this time divided into two factions, one under Rustam, the generalissimo of the Persian Empire, the other under Prince Firoz. Biman, instead of securing the independence of his country, hastened to support Rustam against Firoz. The Arabs, emboldened by their rapid successes, established their camp between Khadijah and Kawfa, where a one Qadisai place celebrated for the battles fought there between the Mussulmans and the Persians. It is about 15 farsakhs from Kawfa and 4 miles from Azab, longitude, 69, latitude, 31 2 feet 3 inches. It was in the year 16 of the Hejra, under the caliphate of Omar ben Khattab, that the Mussulmans, commanded by Sad ben Abi Iwaktas, fought against the infidels. During the action, Sad had with asterisk the town of El-Qadr, not far from Kerbala, marks the old site of Khadijah. As to Kawfa, a collection of ruins marks the site of the capital of the caliphate, which is said to have been as great as Babylon. The exodus of the Parsis by the caliph's order, hordes of nomads came to reinforce their troops. The struggle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, the Persian army was entirely destroyed, and the royal standard drawn into the castle to watch the movements of his troops. This step was regarded as a proof of cowardice, and a Mussulman in the army composed the following verses against him: Tha'al meter, seest thou not that God has sent us the victory, whilst Sad is hiding behind the gates of Qadisai? He was thinking then of increasing his family and of making his wives mothers, for the wives of Sad know not the privations of celibacy. Another poet, Bishr ben Rabia, has spoken of the battle of Qadisai in these terms, same meter, my camel stopped at the gates of Qadisai, my chief was Sad ben Abi, Waktas. Remember, may God guide thee, our prowess near Kodes, and the blindness of our perfidious enemies. That evening many of us would willingly have borrowed the wings of the birds to fly away, when their battalions advanced one after another against us, like unto moving mountains. With my sword I threw their ranks into disorder, and my lance dispersed them, for I am a man worthy of wielding the lance. There was at Azad a castle belonging to the Persians called F***Kodeus, whence, it is said, the name Qadisai. Sad occupied it with his harem, as he was suffering from gout, and could neither sit nor ride. Lying on the top of this fortress he watched his army, and some men posted below transmitted his military orders and arrangements. Mursid, CSA Servi Histoires des Arabes by Qasim de Perceval, 3. 481 to 485, and V. Gesh. Der Chat. I pages 65 ETSCQ. 6. The Parsis fell into the hands of the Arabs. 1. Yezdezerd, informed of this misfortune, escaped to Hoiwan. I and my companions, Amr, father of Thor, the martyr, Haskem, Kays, Noman the brave, and Jarir. There exists a great number of poems composed in honor of this battle, one of the most celebrated, and fraught with the greatest blessings for the Mussulmans. Omar having written to Sad to ask for some information regarding the position of Qadisai, the latter sent him the following. Qadisai is situated between the Moat and Eladik, the canal of the Euphrates. Its left is the sea, a sort of bay, whence lead two roads to Hira, the first, over high hills, the second, over the banks of a river called Kosu, which passes out between Kawarnak and Hira. On its right are numerous streams which water the country. All the tribes who have made peace with the Mussulmans before my arrival tremble before the Persians, and are ready to assist me. The historians of the first conquests divide this affair at Qadisai into 4 battles. The first is called the Battle of Ermith, the second, the Battle of Aghwat, the third, the Battle of Amaz, the evening preceding the fourth, they called the Evening of Harir or of the Storm, and the last, the Battle of Qadisai. The celebrated Rustam, son of Farrukhzad, lost his life in this battle, and the Persians could not replace this skillful general. Dictionnaire géographique, historique et littéraire de la Perse et des contres adjacents, taken from the MTF de Gem el Bolden of Yaku, and see Transaction Barbie de Maynard, Paris, 1861, p. 432. 1 Malcolm, Hist, of Persia Vol. ICH 6. p. 174. V. Geschichte der Kalifen ch 2. Pages 54 ETSEQ Qasim de Perceval, Histoires des Arabes, BKX pages 481 ETSEQ Masudai, Prairies T4, trans. Barbie de Maynard, CIC. p. 207. Taberi, trans. H. Zotenberg, Part 4. Ch. Slee. Pages 385 ETSEQ The exodus of the Parsis 7 SAD, having taken possession of Matan, pursued the fugitive monarch, who withdrew to Rei. In the 20th year of the Hejra, Omar recalled Sad, and Yezdezerd took this opportunity to gather together 150,000 men, all the contingents having been drawn from the province of Khorasan and from the environs of Rei and Hamadan. Firuzan was appointed commander. The Caliph, hearing of the preparations of the Persian king, sent in his turn reinforcements, and placed at their head his general Nomanjay with the strictest orders to destroy the impious religion of the fire worshippers. It was at Niha and * that, after a delay of 2 months, A1 Niha and large town about 3 days' journey from Hamadan, in the direction of the Qibla, south, west. A bullmounder Hisksum says it received this name because it was found wholly built, and in the same condition as at present. Others carry back its foundation to Noah, and think that its present name is an abbreviation of Nu'and or Northwand, that is to say, the city of Noah. Hamza thinks that its old name was Nuhawend, which means the well multiplied. Nuhawend is situated in the 4th climate, 72 longitude and 36 latitude. It is one of the oldest cities of Jabal. It was conquered about the year 19 or 20 of the Hijra. Abu Bakr al-Hadhali, relying upon the testimony of Muhammad, son of Hassan, says, the Battle of Nuhawend was fought in the year 21, under the Caliphate of Omar, son of Khattab. The Mussulmans were 8. The Parsis, the shock of arms decided the fate of Iran. 30,000 Persians fell on the battlefield, and 80,000 were drowned in the moats surrounding the camp. Firuzan was pursued into commanded by Noman ben Mokaran el-Muzani. This general had under him Had Haifah, son of Yemeni, Jarir ben Abd Allah, el-Mughira ben Shaba and el-Ashith ben Qais. When Noman, who was one of the companions of the Prophet, was killed, the commandership passed into the hands of Had Haifah. It was this chief who concluded the peace, as we attribute it to the word Magdanar. This is what el-Mubarak ben Saib, who derived this information from his father, relates. Nuhawend was taken by the army of Kawfa, and Dinwar by the troops of Basra. As the population of Kawfa had considerably increased, some of its inhabitants were obliged to emigrate into the countries newly pacified and subject to Karaoy. It is thus that they came to inhabit Dinwar. The province of Kawfa was received in exchange for Nuhawend, which was annexed to the province of Isfahan, the remainder of Karaoy being taken off from Dinwar and Nuhawend. It was in the reign of Muawiyah ben Abi Sufyan that Nuhawend was called Mahel Basra and Dinwar Mahel Kawfa. The Persians, before the battle of Nuhawend, had gathered together considerable troops. It is said that their army numbered about 150,000 men commanded by Firuzan. After this important battle, which was called the Victory of Victories, the resistance of the Persians became less and less. The most accredited opinion is that these events took place during the 5th year of Omar's caliphate, the year 19 of the Hijra. CFSA sur P. Histoire des Arabes by Qasim de Perceval, Vol 3 p. 491, and the Annals of Abu el-Fida, ed. of Reisk, Vol IP 242. C. B. de Maynard, Diet, Geographic, Hist, and C. p. 573. The Exodus of the Parsis 9, the mountains and killed by a detachment of Arabs. 1. From that time Persia passed into the hands of the caliphs. Yezdezerd escaped at first to Sistan and then to Merv. The governor of this town offered to deliver up the fugitive prince to the Khan of Turkestan. The Turks entered the town in spite of the resistance of the inhabitants, and the king, taking advantage of the confusion, succeeded in hiding himself in a neighboring mill. The miller at first gave protection to the king, but urged by a desire to get possession of his arms and his clothes, he, like a coward, killed the king. The irate people massacred the assassin, and the body of Yezdezerd, son of Shehirir, the last sovereign of the Sassanian dynasty, was sent to Istakhr, there to be deposited in the tomb of his ancestors, AD 650. The conquest of Persia was accomplished with surprising rapidity. Shortly after the death of the king, Islamism was imposed upon all but certain amongst the Majdians offered resistance, and even succeeded in remaining in their father one Malcolm, Hist, of Persia, Vol. ICH 6. p. 176. Jive, Gashik der Khalifan, and c. ch 2. p. 54. Masudai, Prairies d** or, trans. Barbie de Maynard, chec. p. 233. Taberi, trans. Zotenberg, part 4. Ch Slai. p. 467. Io the Parsis land, others, unwilling to accept the law of the Quran, abandoned their hearths, and went and dwelt in the mountainous districts of Khorasan, one where, for 100 years, they were enabled to live and practice their religion without being disturbed. They were, however, obliged to quit this asylum and to take refuge in large numbers in the little island of Hormuz, 2 at the entrance of A1 Khorasan, large country stretching from Iraq, Persian, to Azadwar, the chief town of the province of Juain, and to Bihaq. It is bounded on the side of India, on the south and east, by Thakharistan, Ghazni, Setchistan, and Kerman. It contains fine cities, such as Nisabur, Merv, which has been the capital of Balkh, Herat, Thalakan, Nisa, Abiwerd, Sarax, and other large cities situate on this side of the river Oxus. Some geographers have placed the provinces of Khwarezm and a part of Transoxiana in Khorasan, but that is an error. When Islam appeared in the world, the Khorasanians, by a quite special favor of Providence, eagerly welcomed it. They accepted without opposition the peace offered them, hence they were subjected to a light tax only, and escaped being massacred or made prisoners. The conquest itself took place in the 18th year of the Hejra. Omar ben Khattab sent into Khorasan Al-Anaf ben Qais, who in a short time took possession successively of the two Thabis, Herat, Merv Shahidjan, and Nisabur, after having forced the Persian king Yezdezerd, son of Shahryar, to take refuge in Transoxiana with the Khan of the Turks. C.B. de Maynard, Diet, Geographic, Hist, and c. p. 197. 2. This town is situated on an arm of the sea, communicating with Fars. It serves as a port to Kerman, and it is there that the exodus of the Parsis and the Persian Gulf. Here they made but a short sojourn, and finally decided to seek the protection of the Hindus. They procured vessels and embarked with their wives and children. The relations between Persia and India had been rather frequent, and it was precisely their former intercourse, rendered closer a few send vessels from India deposit the merchandise destined for Kerman, Setchistan, and Khorasan. Some authors write and pronounce it Hormuz. C.B. de Maynard, Diet, Geographic, Hist, and c. p. 595. Mohammed Medjadi gives some historical details concerning the old town and island of Hormuz up to the time of the conquest of Albuquerque, 1514. The town of Hormuz is situated in the second climate, and the heat there is excessive. Founded by Ardeshir Babigan, it was abandoned, in 715, by King Skems ed-Din, who feared the attacks of the neighboring brigands. This king built another town in the island of Jiraun, about 1 farsakh from the coast, and kept for it the name of Hormuz. For 120 years the Franks have exercised there an absolute power. Its governor, Nawr ed-Din, having conceived the fatal idea of asking their assistance when in a difficult situation, allowed them a 10th part of its revenue. In a short time they so skillfully usurped the authority that the king and the vizier of the country had not the least share in the government. Znet, Chapter 9. Before the Portuguese conquest, this island, tributary to Persia and annexed to Kerman, paid an annual contribution of 60,000 dinars. Najat, FOL 670. See also the Arabic text of Abu el-Fida, p. 339, and the Voyages of Ibn Battuta, Volume 2. p. 230. B. de Maynard, Diet. Geographic Hist, and c. p. 595, Note 12. The Parsis Turis before the Arab invasion, that made this migration possible. This we can see from an interesting resume one given in the Gazetteer of the Bombay Presidency, p. 247, and which we reproduce here. In legendary times some religious connection had existed between the great prophet Zoroaster, who flourished about 1000 BC, see Hogg, Essays, 299, and the Brahmin Chandragupta, who was sent back to convert his compatriots. See also in Firdusi the story of Prince Isfandiar, son of Gustasp, who was such a fervent disciple of Zoroaster that he persuaded the Emperor of India to adopt the worship of fire. Eliot, History /v 568. The Hindu tradition of the introduction of fire-worshipping priests from Persia into Dwarka in Kathiawar is probably of a much later date. Riano, Memoir sur Rind, 391,397. Another link, and this time of an entirely political nature, is discovered in the mythical conquests of northern India, which, according to Persian writers, must have followed from the year 1729 BC, Troyer, Rajatarnjanai, 2441. In historical times the Punjab formed part of the Persian dominions since its conquest by Darius Hystaspes, 510 BC, down to the end of the exodus of the Parsis 13 dynasty of the Achaemenides, 350 BC. Rawlinson, Ancient Monarchies, 4. 433, towards the commencement of the Christian era, as is seen from the fire altars on their coins, the Kanarkis or the Scythians of India, the rulers of the Punjab, seem to have adopted the religion of the Magi, Lasson, in JBAS 9. 456, Princep, Note on Historic Researches from Bactrian Coins, 106. As far as southern India is concerned, the mention of Brahmani Magi in Ptolemy, 150, seems to indicate some relation with Persia, but the Kanarese word mag or sun gives a sufficient explanation. Closer connection between India and Persia dates from the restoration of the Persian power under the Sassanid dynasty, 226 to 650 AD. In the 5th century the visit of the Persian prince Biram, 436, who had come, doubtless, to implore aid against the White Huns, Wilson, Ariana Antiqua, 383, his marriage with a Hindu princess, and, according to indigenous accounts, his founding the dynasty of the Hardaban kings, made this intimacy closer. Wilford, as Res 9. 219, Masudai, Prairie's Door, 2. 191, Riano, Mmoir sur Rind, 112, Eliot, History 2. 159, later on Nashirwan the Just, 53 1-579, and his grandson Perviz, 591-628, 14. The Parsis allied themselves, by treaties and by the exchange of rich presents, to the rulers of India and Sind, Masudai, Prairie's Door, 201. As to these treaties, it is interesting to notice that the subject of one of the paintings in the caves of Ajunta is believed to represent the embassy of Nashirwan to Pulixi, king of Badami, in the country south of that of the Marathas, whilst another is supposed to be a copy made after the portraits of Perviz and the beautiful Shireen, Ferguson, in Burgess Ajunta Notes, 92. According to certain narratives, a body of Persians landed, at the commencement of the 7th century, in western India, and it is supposed that to one of these chiefs, regarded by Wilford as a son of Khosrow Parvis, is to be traced the origin of the Udaipur dynasty. Gladwin, N.I. Akbari, 281 Drive, Hunter, as Res 6. 8, Wilford, as Res 9. 233, Princep, Jour Ben, as Soc 4. 684, Wilford considered the Konkanast Brahmins as belonging to the same race, but, although their origin is doubtful, the Konkanasts had settled in India long before the Parsis. Moreover, India and Persia had been connected by commercial treaties. Cosmas Indicoplousts, 545, found some Persians amongst the principal traders settled along the exodus of the Parsis. 15. The coasts of the Indian Ocean, Meghna, Petrolages Cursus, IH 446, Yule, Cathay, I, Klsksi 6, and his assertion as to the existence of a Persian bishop at the head of the Christian communities of Kalyan, Yule, Cathay, I, Klsksi, discloses close relations between Thana and the Persian Gulf. Shortly after the time of Cosmas, the empire of the seas passed from the Romans to the Persians, and the fleets of India and China visited the Persian Gulf. Riano, Abulfta, In, Uklsksi 4. It was this connection between western India and Persia which urged, in 638, H16, Caliph Omar, 634 to 643, to found the city of Bussorah, partly for the needs of commerce and partly to prevent the Indian princes from coming to the help of the Persians. Troyer, Rajatarnjanai, 2449, Chronike de Taberi, 3401, and, in the same year, 638 to 639, prompted him to send a fleet to ravage the coasts of Thana. Eliot, Historiae 415. Taberi, 838 to 921, and Masudai, 900 to 950, both prove that the district round Bussorah and the country under the subjection of King of Oman were regarded by the Arabs as forming part of India. Chronique de Taberi, 3401, Prairies d'Or, 4225. In the 7th century it has been noticed that several Indians had settled in the principal 16 the Parsi cities of Persia, where they enjoyed the free exercise of their religion, Riano, Abulfta in, Uklsksev. It should also be noticed that from the 6th century, when the Persians commenced taking a leading part in the commerce and trade of the East, they visited not only India, but China also, Riano, Abulfetha, in, Uklsksev. Towards the period of their arrival in India, the Parsis were settled in China as missionaries, merchants, or refugees. Ainquitil du Peron, Zendavesta, Uk 30, speaks of Persians going to China, in the 7th century, with a son of Yezdezerd. According to Wilford, as Res 9. 235, another band of emigrants joined them in 750, towards the beginning of the reign of the Abbasides. In 758 the Arabs and the Persians were so strong in Canton that they stirred up several riots and plundered the town. Riano, Abulfta, in, CCCLXXXV, in 846 there is a mention made of muhaffas or mobeds in Canton, Yule, Cathay, Skvi, and 60 years later Masudai affirms that there were many fire temples in China. Prairies d'Or, 486. It is scarcely probable that there could have been only one migration of the Persians. There must have been many such, at different periods, the exodus of the Parsis 17 according as the spirit of persecution was more or less strong amongst the conquerors. The traditions concerning this subject are vague. Are in absolute ignorance as to the mode of their departure, and the number of those who, in despair, had to quit the Persian Gulf. The only information that we can get at concerning this subject is that contained in a book entitled Kissa-i-1 Sanjan, written towards the year 1600 by a Majdian priest called Biram Kaikobad Sanjana, who dwelt in Nayasari. According to this author, Diu, to a small town on the Gulf of 1c translation from the Persian of Kissa-i Sanjan, or History of the Arrival and Settlement of the Parsis in India, by E. B. Eastwick, in the Journal of the Bombay Branch, Royal Asiatic Society, Vol. IP 167. As for us, we have followed the order of events, such as it is presented by Mr. B. B. Patel in his admirable work, The Parsi Prakash, and the interesting resume of Mr. Dosabai Framji Karika. C. Bomanji by Ramji Patel, Parsi Prakash, being a record of important events in the growth of the Parsi community in western India, chronologically arranged from the date of their immigration into India to the year 1860 AD, Vol. In Fortio, Bombay, 1878 to 1888, 1053 pages, in Gujarati, and Dosabai Framji Karika, History of the Parsis, 2 volumes in 8 vo, London, 1884. 2 Dio Portuguese possession latitude, 2043 feet 20 inches north, longitude, 71 feet 30 inches east at the entrance of the Gulf of Cambay, to the south of the Gujarat Peninsula. Its length from east to west is 6 miles and a half, and its greatest 3/8 the Parsis Cambay to the south of the Kathiawar coast, was the first port where the refugees landed. Here they dwelt for nearly 20 years, at the end of which they sought for another residence. There is a mysterious passage in the Kissa-i Sanjan upon this second immigration, but it scarcely explains it. Old Dastur, high priest, who had applied himself to the science of pre-extent from north to south, is 1 mile. It has a small but very fine harbor. The climate is dry and stifling, the soil barren, water scarce, and agriculture much neglected. Its principal products are wheat, millet, nachni, bajri, coconut, and some kinds of fruits. The population of Diu consists of about 10,765 inhabitants, of whom 419 are Christians, 9,575 Hindus, and 771 Mahomedans. At its most flourishing period the number had risen, it is said, to nearly 50,000. Now there are not more than 3,107 houses, very poor and uncomfortable for the most part. In fact, the commerce of Diu is now ruined. The resources of the inhabitants consisted formerly in weaving and dyeing, fishing is their only occupation. Some bold minds attempt trading on the Mozambique coast. The appearance of Diu is interesting. The fortress, Redom, built after the siege of 1545 by Joan de Castro, is imposing in appearance. To the west, the town extends divided in 2 quarters, that of the Christians and that of the pagans. Of the fine edifices of Diu, there still remains the college of the Jesuits turned into the cathedral church. Of the other convents, that of Saint Francois serves as a military hospital, and that of Saint Jean de Dieu as a cemetery, while that of Saint Dominique is in ruins. C. W. W. Hunter, Imperial Gazetteer of India, Vol. 3 p. 171. The exodus of the Parsis 19 dieting from the stars, declared that they should leave this place and seek another residence. All rejoiced on hearing these words, and immediately set sail for Gujarat. Scarcely had they left the coast of Diu when a storm burst upon them, and the Persians believed themselves hopelessly lost. They then implored the aid of him for whom they had abandoned all, promising to light the sacred fire as soon as they should have touched the shores of India. He heard the prayer of his faithful children. The tempest fell, and they were able to land at one Sanjan, 25 miles south of Daman. 2A1, Sanjan, small village of the Thana district, formerly an important town known to the Portuguese, and called, after them, under the name of St. John. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol. 3 p. 174. 2 Daman, a Portuguese town, about 100 miles to the north of Bombay. Its superficial area is 82 square miles, comprising the Pargana of Nagar Haveli. The population consists of about 40,980 souls. The settlement is composed of 2 distinct parts, Daman and the Pargana of Nagar Haveli, separated by a territory belonging to the English and by a railroad running through Bombay, Baroda, and central India. The town was sacked by the Portuguese in 1532, then rebuilt by the natives, and retaken by the Portuguese in 1558, and made by them one of their settlements in India. They have converted the mosque into a church, and have built 8 others. Commerce flourished there before the fall of the Portuguese power in India, and extended 20 the Parsis. The territory of Sanjan was, at that time, subject to the sage Jati Rana, one to whom the Persians sent a dastur, with presents, to obtain permission to settle in his country, and to inquire what conditions would be imposed upon them. The dastur, approaching the Rana, invoked blessings upon him, and after having explained to him the reasons that had determined the fugitives to quit their fatherland, he narrated their misfortunes, and asked for his countrymen authoritative permission to settle in Sanjan. The prince, it is said, struck by the warlike and distinguished appearance of these foreigners, at first conceived some fear, and desired to know something of their usages and customs. During their sojourn at even as far as the African coasts, where ships carried the cotton stuffs manufactured at Daman. From 1817 to 1837 the trade in opium, brought from Karachi and imported into China, was prosperous, but since the conquest of Sind by the English the transport of opium has been prohibited, and Daman has thus been deprived of its greatest source of wealth. The soil is moist and fertile, specially in the Pargana of Nagar Haveli. Rice, wheat, and tobacco are grown there, but in spite of the facilities for agriculture, only a 20th part of the territory is cultivated. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol 3 p. 21. 1. The Parsis call him Jade Rana. Dr. Wilson suggests that he was doubtless Jayadeva or Vanaraja of Anahilawada, who reigned in Gujarat from 745 to 806. The exodus of the Parsis 21. The Persians had learned sufficiently well the spirit and character of the Hindus, to answer his questions in a satisfactory manner. The most learned amongst them drew up 16 slokas or distihs, in which they summarized the duties enjoined by their religion. We 1. Are worshippers of Ahura Mazda, the Supreme Being, of the sun and of the 5 elements. We 2. Observe silence during bath, at prayers, while making offerings to the fire, and when eating. We 3. Use incense, perfumes, and flowers in our religious ceremonies. We 4. Honor the cow. We 5. Wear the sacred garment, the sudra, or the shirt, the kusti or thread for the waist, and the twofold cap. 1. There are several manuscripts of the slokas in Sanskrit and in Gujarati. In the Indian Antiquary, p. 214, July 5, 1872, we find a version of it, according to the translation prepared by Dastur Hoshang Jamasp, the high priest at Pune. The author compares it to another more ancient one, then in the hands of Dr. Wilson, and points out numerous divergences. Besides, according to Dr. Wilson himself, there are no 2 manuscripts, either in Gujarati or in Sanskrit, similar in wording, though identical so far as the substance is concerned. 22. The Parsis. We 6. Rejoice ourselves with songs and musical instruments on marriage occasions. We 7. Permit our women to wear ornaments and use perfumes. We 8. Are enjoined to be liberal in our charities and especially in excavating tanks and wells. We 9. Are enjoined to extend our sympathies to all beings, male or female. We 10. Practice ablutions with Jayamutra, one of the products of the cow. We 1. Wear the sacred thread when praying and eating. We 12. Feed the sacred fire with incense. We 3. Offer up prayers 5 times a day. We 14. Carefully observe conjugal fidelity and purity. We 15. Celebrate annual religious ceremonies in honor of our ancestors. We 16. Observe the greatest precautions with regard to our wives during their confinement and / at certain periods of the month. /J. It is interesting to notice that, at this juncture, the Zoroastrians showed themselves singularly skillful and clever, avoiding all mention of the true basis of their religion, and only setting forth certain ceremonies, of no importance, which seemed of a nature likely to conciliate the goodwill of the exodus of the Parsis 23. Rana. Anxious to find some place of repose, the Parsis knew the Hindus and their susceptibilities of caste and religion too well not to be willing to please them, and that is why they formulated their answers with a prudence and skill which won the favor of the Rana. He therefore permitted them to reside in the city on condition that they adopted the language of the country, and ceased to speak that of their ancestors, that their women should dress according to the Hindu mode, that the men should no longer carry weapons, and should perform their marriage ceremonies at night, according to Hindu custom. What could the unfortunate exiles, thirsting for peace and rest, do but accept these conditions? And this they did. They settled down in a vast tract of land not far from Sanjan, and with full hearts offered prayers to Hormuzd. They resolved to fulfill the vow they had made at the time of their memorable voyage from Diu to Sanjan, to raise the altar for lighting the sacred fire. The Hindus, far from opposing this, helped to build the temple, 721, and Zoroastrian rites and ceremonies began to be performed from that time on Indian soil. Parsi Prdkdsh, p2. For nearly 300 years the Parsis lived peacefully at Sanjan, but with time, their 24 the Parsis numbers having increased, some emigrated to other places, in the north, to Cambay, 1 Ankles War, 2 Variav, Vankaner, and Surat, in the south, to Thana 3 Anchal, places still to be found on the map of India. Their first migration from Sanjan seems to have been to Cambay, 942 to 997. Several considerations attracted them to this place, and, besides, they seem to have prospered there. For the settlement of Variaf seems to have one Cambay, capital of the country of that name, a province of Gujarat, down the Gulf of Cambay, to the north of the estuary of the Mahi. Population, 1,872, 33,709. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol 2 p. 334. 2 Ankleswar, capital of the subdivision of that name in the district of Bharuch. Population, 1,872, 9,414 inhabitants. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol IP 203. A3 Thana British district in the Bombay Presidency. The territory, which formed part of the states of the Peshwa, was annexed by the English government in 1818 on the overthrow of Baji Rao. The population is 847,424 inhabitants, 1,872 including 3,920 Parsis. Thana is 26 miles north of Bombay. It possesses a station and a port. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol 9 p. 34. For some Parsis who, since their arrival in India, in 636, had remained in the south of Gujarat, were attracted to the temple of Kumarika Kshetra, on the mouth of the Mahi, 10th century. These newcomers succeeded in commerce, and were followed by others, so that the Parsi element became sufficiently strong to drive the Hindus from the town. Amongst those who fled there was a certain Kalyan Ray who, taking refuge in Surat, acquired a great fortune by trading in pearls. His wealth gained him some importance, so that the exodus of the Parsis 25 been as old as that of Cambay. Pahlavi inscription on the sides of the Kanheri caves, tells us that a certain number of Parsis visited them on the 2nd of December, 999, and according to another similar Pahlavi inscription, other Parsis seem to have visited them on the 5th of November, IO2I. 1. We then find the Parsis at Nayasari 2, in 1142 a Mob named Kamdan Yardosht quitted Sanjan with his family, to perform there some religious ceremonies required by the Zoroastrians of that place. If we follow the authority of a certain manuscript preserved by the descendants of Meherji Rana, the celebrated high priest who he gathered together a band of Rajputs and Kalas, who attacked the Parsis one night, set fire to their houses, and put some to the sword, the rest took to flight. Kalyan Ray then formed a project to build a town on the ruins of the Parsi colony. See Gazetteer of the Bombay Presidency. 1. The translation of the first inscription is due to Mr. K. R. Kama in his Studies of the Zoroastrian Religion, Vol 3 p. 160, and the second to Mr. M. S. Wacha, in the collection entitled Zarthashti Avyas, Vol 4 p. 212. See Parsi Prakash, p. 2. A2 Nayasari town in the territory of the Gakwar of Baroda, on the banks of the Purna, 12 miles from the sea, 18 from Surat, and 149 from Bombay. LAT 22-7N, long. 7340E. The population in 1872 amounted to 14,700 inhabitants. Nayasari is a very flourishing town, its prosperity depending on the Parsi colony. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol 7 p. 179. 26. The Parsis lived 3 centuries ago. It was from the Parsis that Nayasari received its name. When they arrived there 51-1, Yes desert they found a climate as pleasant as that of Mazandaran, one of the provinces of Persia, and called it Navisari or Nausari. Since then it has been called Nayasari Nagmandal instead of Nagmandal, its old name. 1. From the narrations of different travelers it would seem that the Parsis had settled in a great many cities of Upper India, but it is impossible to be /Sarke fallen town of Thabaristan, Mazandaran. It was here, says Belladori, that the governor of the province under the Tahirides resided. The author of the Najat to indicate the great antiquity of this place, attributes its foundation to the Homers. See also B. de Maynard, Diet Geo, Hist, and c. p. 295. It is a ruined city. According to Fraser, it had a population of 30,000 inhabitants towards the commencement of the century. D'Anville and Renil have tried to identify Sari with the ancient Zadrakarta, the greatest city of Hyrcania, where the army of Alexander stopped to sacrifice to the gods. It was here that the great achievements of the heroic times of Persia are supposed to have been accomplished. Faridun, the legendary hero of the Persians, is supposed to be buried under the threshold of a mosque, which is erected on the site of a fire temple. Sari is surrounded by immense gardens, and the country around is covered with mulberry trees, cotton plants, sugar cane, and rice fields. It has a port on the Caspian Sea, at the mouth of the Tijun, called Farabad, the abode of joy founded by Shahbaz. Pietro della Valle speaks of it as the principal city of Mazandaran. The Exodus of the Parsis 27 say whether these came from western India or from Persia. Mohammedan traveller of the 10th century, Al-Isthukri, mentions several parts of India as being occupied by the Guebris, that is the name given by Mohammedan writers to the Parsis. An unexceptionable testimony of their presence at Dehradun, 1079, is furnished to us in the attack of Ibrahim the Ghaznavid against a colony of fire worshippers living in that place. Similarly, we find the Parsis in the Punjab before 1178, if we are to believe the tradition of a voyage made that year by a Parsi priest named Mahayar. He had come from Uk, a town situated on the conflux of the 5 rivers of the Punjab, to Seistan in Persia, in order to acquire a thorough knowledge of the religious rites. After 6 years of study under the Dasturs, he brought into India, in 1184, a copy of the Pahlavi translation of the Vendidad. It seems also that there must have been some intercourse between the Parsis of Cambay and those of the Punjab, since, in 1328, the former were in possession of some copies of the Vendidad acquired by Mahayar. At the time of the invasion of India by Timur, we find Parsis or Magi amongst the captives. The men who have been represented as believing one Westergaard, Zendavesta p. 304. 28 The Parsis in the 2 principles of good and evil, and admitting at the same time Yazdan, God, and Ahriman, the devil, and who offered a desperate resistance to Timur at Tughlaqpur, were the Parsis. It is said besides that the colony at Gujarat was reinforced by a large number of Parsis, who fled before the conqueror. The mention made by a Mohammedan writer of the destruction of fire temples by the Emperor Sikandar, 1504, shows that long before this date Parsi emigrants had dwelt in Upper India. Sir H. M. Eliot, in his History of India, following the opinion of Professor Dawson, affirms that the Guebris of Rohilkhand, the Magyas of Malwa, and the Maks of Tughlaqpur, although at present they offer no religious peculiarities, are the remnants of the Parsis of Upper India. According to a communication anent Mount Abu by Sir Alexander Burns, cited in the Gazetteer of Bombay, there had been a Parsi colony at Chandroili towards the middle of the 15th century. It is believed that the Parsis settled at Ankleswar in the middle of the 13th century of our era. One of their religious books, the Visperd, was in fact copied there in 1258. There is no doubt of their having been at Bharuch Ra1 Bharuch British district in the Bombay Presidency. The exodus of the Parsis 29 before the commencement of the 14th century, for we find that Adikama was built there in 1309 by a Parsi named Pestanji, and the ruins of a still older tower are to be found in the suburb of Bahulpur. The settlements at Thana and Chal must have been founded at an early date. Mohammedan and European travelers mention them in speaking of these 2 places, without giving them their true name. However, the description given of them agrees very much with that of the Parsis, and this idea is confirmed by Odoric, an Italian monk who was traveling in India about the beginning of the 14th century. The people, at Thana, were, according to him, idolaters, for they worshipped fire, serpents, and trees, and did not bury their dead, but carried them with great pomp to the fields, and cast them down as food for population 350,332 souls, 1,872. There are about 3,116 Parsis there, nearly all traders or agriculturists. Its capital on the Nerbudda has a population of 36,932 inhabitants. The English had a factory there since 1616, they took possession of Bharuch in 1703. The Parsis must have settled there since the 11th century, many quitted Bharuch for Bombay. See Imp Gaz of India, Vol 2 pages 224 etseq. 1 C. Voyages en Assis du Frère Odoric de Pordenon Religieux de Saint-François. Edited and annotated by M. H. Cordier, p. 82, Paris, 1891. 30. The Parsis' beasts and birds. Now, as the Hindus either burn or bury their dead, the custom here described relates evidently to the Parsis who, later on, left this place in a body. Tradition preserved at Thana furnishes an amusing instance of the manner in which the colony contrived to escape a forced conversion to Christianity. The Parsis, constrained to renounce their faith, and having no means of escape, succeeded by cunning in avoiding the persecutions they were threatened with. They repaired in a body to the governor and declared themselves ready to embrace Christianity, demanding as an only favor a delay till the following Sunday before renouncing their faith, in order to take advantage of the few days of respite to worship the sacred fire and celebrate, for the last time, their festivals. The Portuguese were so pleased with this prompt submission to their will that a proclamation was issued to the effect that, on the day fixed, no one should interfere with the Majdians in the performance of their rites and ceremonies. The Parsis prepared a great feast, to which all the notables were invited, wine flowed freely, and while the guests were indulging themselves in it, the Parsis, to the sound of music and in the middle of the dancing, left the town and the exodus of the Parsis 31 reached Kalyan, to the south of Thana, where they settled. Travelers in India from the 14th to the 16th centuries have found Parsis in different places. There is reason to believe that at that time nothing of any importance befell the community. The Parsis lived amicably with the Hindus, and were chiefly occupied in agriculture. About 1305 an event of considerable importance occurred in their history, at the time of a struggle maintained by the Hindu chief of Sanjan against Mahmud Shah or Alauddin Khilji, Parsi Prdkdskyp4, who had sent into Gujarat a strong army commanded by Alp Khan. 2 Thana was abandoned for over 3 centuries. In 1774 the Parsis returned and took possession of it, according to the terms of a treaty concluded with a Maratha Sardar, Raghunathro Dada Sahib. Kavasji Rostamji, of Bombay, accompanied them, and he was entrusted with the office of Patel in the following places: Charnabanda, Munpisar, Trombai, Muth, Merv, Manori, Vesava, Danda, Bandora, Kalyan, Dhimurdi, and other places in the island of Salsette. 2 Dr. Wilson, JBBRAS, 1182, has suggested that the Mahmud Shah of the Kissa-i Sanjan was Mahmud Begeda, who reigned over Gujarat from 1459 to 1513. The mention of Champaner * as his capital seems to indicate that the author of the Kissa-i Sanjan thought that the Musalman prince was the famous Mahmud Begeda. But the conquest of Gujarat by a * fort and village in the Panchmahals district, situated on an isolated rock of great height. See Imp Gaz of India, Vol 2 p. 375. 32 The Parsis / the Mahomedan general arrived before Sanjan with 30,000 men. The Hindu prince, conscious of his danger, appealed to those whom his ancestors had so generously received into their country. The Parsis were not unmindful of this, and 1,400 of them, under the command of Ardeshir, joined the troops of the Rana. In defending his cause they were equally defending their own independence and religious liberty which they had come to seek under his kindly protection. The armies met not far from Sanjan. Already were the Hindus giving way under the stress of the Mahomedans when the Parsis engaged directly in the combat. Ardeshir and his followers rushed into the thick of the fight, and Alp Khan was so complete that it leaves no doubt that Sanjan fell into his hands. The conqueror might possibly, though less likely, be Mahmud Shah Tughlaq, who reconquered Gujarat and the Thana coast in 1348, and not Mahmud Begada, as the authorities agree in saying that, after long wanderings, the fire was brought from Sanjan to Nayasari. About the beginning of the 15th century, Ijig. Alp Khan may be either Ulugh Khan, Alauddin's brother, who is sometimes called by mistake Alp Khan, or he may be Alp Khan, Alauddin's brother-in-law. Ulugh Khan conquered Gujarat, 1295 to 1297, and Alp Khan governed it, 1300 to 1320. The Alp Khan of the text was doubtless Ulugh Khan. Eliot, 3157, 163. See Gazetteer of the Bombay Presidency. The exodus of the Parsis 33 compelled Alp Khan to fly. But the Mohammedan general soon reappeared with reinforcements. Ardeshir, addressing the Hindu prince, swore to him the most complete fidelity, and although the enemy was in numbers superior to his handful of men, he returned to the field of battle. It was at this time that a single combat took place between Ardeshir and one of the Mohammedan chiefs, a combat in which the latter was thrown from his horse and killed by the Parsi. Alp Khan, enraged by this scene, threw himself in the contest. Furious carnage followed, and Ardeshir was struck in his turn by a dart which threw him off his horse. The Rana perished, and Alp Khan became master of Sanjan. The Parsis had to seek a new residence. They had much to suffer from this Mohammedan conquest, and therefore many fled to the mountains of Bharout, 8 miles east of Sanjan. The cave where the sacred fire was deposited is still to be seen. According to the Qissa-i Sanjan, the fugitives remained there only 12 years, after which they quitted this mountainous district. In 1839, when Dr. J. Wilson visited Sanjan, he found only 1 or 2 Parsi families there. The ruins of Adikama constructed before 400 are still to be seen, but there is not a single Parsi to be found there. 434 The Parsis and went to Bansda, one about 50 miles northeast of Nayasari, where a few Parsi families had already settled. 14 years later, 1331, they bore the sacred fire to Nayasari, where their co-religionists were numerous and influential. But the date 1419 being generally accepted as the year in which the sacred fire was brought to Nayasari, it may be presumed that between the flight of the Parsis from Sanjan and the era of their new independence, a whole century, and not 26 years, must have elapsed. From Nayasari the fire was removed to Surat, on account of the apprehensions of the inroads of the Pindaris, and was again removed to Nayasari 3 years later. Thence, owing to certain disputes among the priests, it was taken to Balsar. After being there for some time it was transferred to Adwada on October 28, 1742, here it is to this day, and here is to be seen the oldest fire temple of the Zoroastrians in India, and the one held in the greatest veneration, Pars *Prokch, p. 95. A1 Bansda. Tributary state, in the province of Gujarat, bounded on the north and west by the Surat district, on the southeast by the Baroda state, on the east by the Dang states, and on the south by the state of Dharampur. The capital contains 2,321 inhabitants. CIMP Gaz of India, Vol 2 pages 401-2. The exodus of the Parsis 35. In the midst of the calamities that followed the overthrow of the Rana of Sanjan, the Parsis continued to apply themselves to agriculture. Single incident deserves being related. One of their small colonies had settled in Variev, not far from Surat, and was under the rule of the Raja of Ratanbai, a Rajput chief who attempted to impose an extraordinary tribute on the Parsis. They refused, and defeated the soldiers sent to enforce it. The Raja's soldiers then sought an opportunity of avenging themselves, and seized the moment when the Parsis were invited to a wedding. These, surprised in the midst of their wives and children, were all ruthlessly massacred. The anniversary of this cruel carnage is still observed at Surat. The settlement of the Parsis in this latter place is the most recent of all. The earliest mention made of it does not go further back than 1478. It was there that the community first acquired its great importance and came in contact with the we Europeans. Shall see its destiny further on. It is very difficult to assign a fixed date to the arrival of the Parsis in Bombay. It seems probable that they were induced to do this by English merchants, and that their first settlement in this island was a little before the time at 36 the Parsis was ceded to England by the Portuguese, as the dowry of Catherine of Braganza on her marriage with the Stuart King Charles II. 1668, Dr. Fryer, who visited Bombay in the year on 1671, says, the other side of the Great Bay, towards the sea, there is a sort of promontory called Malabar Hill, a rocky mountain covered with woods, on the top of which is a recently erected Parsi tomb. 2. Now, as the first care of the Parsis, wherever they settle, is to construct a Tower of Silence, it is to be presumed that the community could not have been of any importance before this period. It has prospered since. It is in Bombay at the present time that can be best studied the changes that have been going on for 2 centuries, and which make the modern Parsis the most loyal subjects of the British Crown, and the most active agents of civilization and progress. In this first chapter we have confined ourselves to a summary indication of their principal settle. One new account of East India and Persia, in 8 letters, from 1672 to 1681, by John Fryer, in 1698. Letter 2. p. 67. 2. This Tacoma still exists on the Malabar Hill. It was built in 1670 by Modi Herji Wacha, an ancestor of the Wacha Gandhi family. The exodus of the Parsis 37 ments in the presidency and to a succinct recital of the most prominent events which have signalised their sojourn in India before the arrival of the we Europeans. Will now freely approach the study we have proposed to undertake. The reader will not, we hope, lose sight of their grievous exodus, and, at the height of the fame of the Dadists, the Banajis, the Jamshedji Jajabhois, the Kamas, the Pettis, and many other no less illustrious names, will remember the first fugitives of Persia, and their kindly reception by the Rana of Sanjan. Welcome, said the prince, welcome to those who walk faithfully in the way of Hormuzd. May their race prosper and increase. May their prayers obtain the remission of their sins, and may the sun smile on them. May Lakshmi by her liberality and her gifts contribute to their wealth and to the fulfilling of their desires, and, forever, may their rare merits of race and intellect continue to distinguish them in our midst. Chapter 2. The Zoroastrians in Persia. Let us now turn to the Zoroastrians who had remained behind in their fatherland. Although it is only by the way that we have to treat of this subject, it is nevertheless proper not to leave out of notice this nucleus of the Majdian community who have remained so faithful to the religion of their ancestors, and who have been so tried in their long residence in the midst of powerful and pitiless conquistadors. Shall have occasion, besides, in the course of this work, to look back upon these far-off regions, to note the frequent relations between the Parsis of Persia and their brethren of India, and the inestimable benefits secured by the wealthy Parsis of Bombay for the unfortunate Guebris of Yezd and Kerman. 200 years after the Mohammedan 38 the Zoroastrians in Persia 39 conquest the condition of Persia had entirely changed. The national spirit was dead, and the entire population had embraced Islamism. It is in the presence of changes so sudden and so complete that one feels justified in raising the disquieting question of the influence of race and surroundings on the history of a we nation. Do not need to address ourselves to modern thinkers to find it clearly formulated. According to Renat, as far back as the 2nd century, Bardsain had wondered that if man is the creature of his surroundings and of circumstances, how is it that the same country is seen to produce human developments entirely different? If man is governed by the laws of race, how is it that a nation which has changed its religion, for example, become Christian, comes to be quite different from what it used to be? Have only to substitute the epithet Mohammedan for the epithet Christian to bring the question to the point. How, In fact, could such a radical change be effected, and to what degree of despair must the Zoroastrians have reached, to submit to the one Rana has summarized, in these few terse lines, the long dissertations in the 6th book, 10th chapter, of the Parsi and Paratio Evangelica of Eusebius. See Marcus Aurelius CHXXIV pages 439-440. 40. The Parsis' leveling laws of Islam. If we attempted to explain this, we should have to go back to the history of the internal agitations and the policy of the Persian court, and their study would draw us away too far. Have noticed only the chief events of its history, without stopping to gather any instruction from facts. Let it suffice to say that the same causes made the Arabs victorious over the Byzantine emperor and the Persian Shah, and that these causes were the weakness and exhaustion of the national dynasties in the presence of the vital elements of the conquerors. The people suffered from the carelessness of their kings, individual energy was powerless against the invasion of disciplined and fanatical tribes, commanded by generals like Omar and his officers. The Persian nation was singularly maltreated. 1. The national unity was broken. Each province accommodated itself in the best way it could to the regime imposed by circumstances and by the inclinations of local chiefs. From that time the boundaries of the ancient kingdom underwent changes from century to century. In the 10th century, Tahir, governor of Khorasan, C. Malcolm, Hist, of Persia, Vol. ICH8. p. 275 ETSEQ. The Zoroastrians in Persia 41 San, threw off the heavy yoke of the caliphs of Baghdad, and established, in his province, the authority of the Tahirides. After them came the Safarides, the Samanides, and all those foreign dynasties that divided the sovereignty amongst themselves, such as the Ghaznavides, the Seljukides, and finally there came, with all its calamities, the torrent of invasions to which succeeded the reigns of the Safis, and of those dynasties, cruel and grasping, which have succeeded each other on the throne of Persia without doing anything for the true welfare of the people. As we have seen, the followers of Zoroaster who would not accept the religion of Islam expatriated themselves. Those who could not abandon their country, and continued to cling to their old religion, had to resign themselves to frightful sufferings. These dwelt chiefly in Pars and Khorasan. European travelers who have visited Persia at different periods, have all been struck by their miserable and precarious condition, and have felt interested in their language, religion, and customs. Quote here some of them. Pietro della Valle, at the time of his sojourn in Persia, studied them closely, and this is what he has to say: these past few days I have been to see their 42 the Parsis' new town that of the Gaurs, or, let us say, their separate habitation, which, like the new Siolfa inhabited by the Christian Armenians, like the Anu Taurus, or Abbasbad, where dwell the Mahomedans brought from Taurus, adjoins Isfahan, just as if it were a suburb, and although, at present, it is separated from it by some gardens, nevertheless with time, for the number of inhabitants greatly increases every day. Isfahan and this habitation of the Gaurs, with the two others aforesaid, will make but one place. I am therefore doubtful whether to call them separate citadels, or suburbs, or rather considerable parts of this same town of Isfahan, as is the region beyond the Tiber and our city of Rome. This habitation of the Gaurs has no other name that I know of except Gauristan, that is to say, according to the Persians, the place of the infidels, just as we call the quarters one Shah Abbas the Great, desirous of increasing the commerce of Isfahan, caused 1,500 Gueber families to come and settle outside the town on this side of the river Zendarud. Under Abbas II, they quitted Jerabat and returned to the Wi mountains. In Camphor that Abbas II transported, in fact, nearly 600 agricultural families into the Armenian colony of Sulfa, or Shulfa, founded by his ancestor, and which to the south bordered on the quarters of the Guebres. Amenitates Exotica, and p. 164, Lemgovies, 1712. The Zoroastrians in Persia 43 of the Jews, Jewry. This place is very well built, the streets are wide and very straight, and much finer than those of Siolfa, for it was built later with more design, but all the houses are low and one-storied, without any ornament, quite consistent with the poverty of those that occupy them, and in this respect very different from the houses of Siolfa, which are very magnificent and well planned, for the Gaurs are poor and miserable, at least they show all possible signs of being such. In fact, they are employed in no traffic, they are simply like peasants, people, in short, earning their livelihood with much labor and difficulty. They are all dressed alike, and in the same color, which resembles somewhat brick cement. Voyages, French translation, Paris, 166-1, Vol 2 p. 104. About the same time, 1618, Figueroa, the ambassador of Philip III in Persia, remarks as follows: in the most eastern part of Persia, and in the province of Kerman, which forms its frontier to the east, there have remained some of those ancient and true Persians, who, although they have mixed with the others, and by uniting themselves to their conquerors, have become like one people, all the same retain their primitive 44 the Parsis mode of living, their customs, and their religion. Thus, at this day, they adore the sun as did the ancient Persians during the period their empire was the first in this world, and, following their example, they invariably keep in their houses a lighted fire, which they keep up unextinguished with as much care as the Vestal Virgins of Rome did. The Embassy of Don Gardas de Silva de Figueroa in Persia. Transaction Wickford, Paris, 1667, in Fortio, p. 177. The Venat, 1664-67, declares that there are in Persia, at the present day, and particularly in Kerman, people who worship the fire like the Persians of old, and these are the Guebres. They are recognized by a dark yellow-colored material of which the men and women like to have their dresses and veils made, these being the only ones who wear this color. Moreover, the Guebre women never cover their faces, and generally speaking, they are very well formed. These Guebres have a language which with its characters is understood only by them, and they are also very ignorant. Continuation of the Travels in the East, Second Part, p. 116, Paris, 1674. With Dollier, 1665, we shall enter the quarters of the Guebres assigned to them by the Persian king. If you go about a quarter of a mile from the Zoroastrians in Persia 45 Julfa in the direction of the mountain, you will see a fine village composed of one long street. It is called Guebrabad, and is the dwelling place of the Guebres, or the Gavra, who are said to be descended from the old Persians who worshipped the fire. The king has given them this place to live in, having destroyed them in many other places. They are dressed in a fine tan-colored woolen stuff, the dress of the men being of the same form as that of the other Persians. But the women's dress is entirely different. They keep their faces uncovered, and wear round their heads a loosely tied scarf with a veil to cover their shoulders, not ill resembling our gypsies. Their drawers are like the upper part of Swiss hose, reaching to their heels. Most of their stuffs are manufactured at Kerman, a large town on the south coast of Persia, where there are several of this sect. They are so reserved on the subject of their religion that it is difficult to know anything certain about it. They do not bury their dead, but leave them in the open air in an enclosure. I entered some of their houses, where I saw nothing particular except that the women, far from avoiding us, as the others do, were very glad to see and speak to us. The Bealtes of Persia, p. 51. 46 The Parsis towards the same time, 1665-1671, when Chardin went to Persia, he found the Zoroastrians spread over the Karamanian desert, and chiefly in the provinces of Yezd and Kerman. He calls them Guebres from the Arabic word gaur, infidels, or idolaters, pronounced Jaur by the Turks. The Persian fire worshippers, Vol. 9 pages 134 etseq are not so well formed, nor so fair, as the Mahomedan Persians, who are the Persians of this day. Nevertheless the men are robust, having a fairly good stature, and are well featured. The women are coarse, with a dark olive complexion, I think, more to their poverty than to nature, for some among them have rather fine features. The men wear their hair and beards long, they put on a short-fitting vest and a long woolen cap. They dress in cotton, woolen, or mohair stuff, and prefer the brown or dead leaf color as being perhaps most suited to their condition. The women are very coarsely dressed. I have never seen anything showing such bad grace, nor anything further removed from gallantry. The dress of the Guebres so greatly resembles the Arab dress that one would think the Arabs, the Zoroastrians in Persia 47, copied it from them when they conquered their country. They work either as ploughmen or as laborers, or fullers, and workers in wool. They make carpets, caps and very fine woolen stuffs. Their chief occupation is agriculture. They regard it, not only as a fine and innocent employment, but also as a noble and meritorious one. These ancient Persians are gentle and simple in manners, and live very peacefully under the guidance of their elders, who are also their magistrates, and who are confirmed in their authority by the Persian government. Then follow numerous details concerning their manners, beliefs, and temples. The chief temple was then near Yezd, and the high priest, the Dastur Dasturan, resided there. Ed of Amsterdam, J. L. Delorme, Mxi. Kerporter, 1818-1820, speaks also of the Guebres, some of them, he says, poor and faithful to their religion, not having the means of gaining a distant shelter, remain slaves on their native soil, their souls raised to heaven, their eyes bent to the ground, weeping over their profane sanctuaries. While the wealthier ones were flying to the mountainous regions of the frontiers, or to the shores of India, these few 48 the Parsis faithful ones ended in finding comparative security in their extreme poverty, and took refuge in Yezd and Kerman, far from the eye of the conquerors. Yezd, even now, contains from 4 to 5,000 of their descendants, and on account of their relatively large number they are allowed to practice their faith in a more open manner than in the smaller localities. In general they are excellent cultivators, gardeners, and artisans, and c. Travels in Georgia, Persia, and c. Vol. 2 p. 46, London, 1821-1822. The census of the Guebre population, taken towards the end of this century, gives an absurd figure. Find no vestige of them anywhere except in Yezd, and in the neighborhood of Tehran, in Kaskan, Shiraz, and Bushire. In 1854, according to the information furnished to the Persian Amelioration Society of Bombay, and quoted by Mr. Dosabai Framji Karika, the total came to 7,200 individuals, viz., 6,658 at Yezd, 3,310 men and 3,348 women, 450 in Kerman, 50 in Tehran, and some at Shiraz. 2. The Parsis, their history, manners, customs, and religion, ch. 2. Pages 31 ETSEQ, London, 1858. 2. In 15 years the number has risen by 18% or I% per year, thus, in February, 1878, there were 1,341 Zoroastrians in Kerman. In August, 1879, the number had risen to 1,378, viz., an increase of if per cent. The Zoroastrians in Persia 49 according to the census of October, 1879, by General Hudam Schindler, the Zoroastrian population comprised 8,499 individuals, of whom 4,367 are men and 4,132 women, they being distributed in the following manner: in Yezd, 1,242, in the surrounding districts, 5,241, in Kerman, 1,498, in the surrounding districts, 258, at Bahramabad, 58, at Tehran, 150, at Kaskan, 15, at Shiraz, 25, at Bushire, 12. The latest census, 1892, shows a sensible increase of the population, rising to 9,269 individuals. Yezd and Kerman are the two most important towns, the former being about 200 miles southeast of Isfahan, the latter about 380 miles from the sea, in the port 1 Ahudam Schindler. Die Parsen in Persian, ihr Sprach und einiger Gebrauch. CZDMGT 36 Turband, pages 54 ETSEQ, Leipzig, 1882. Dupré, 1807-1809, and Kinnear, 1810, register the number of Zoroastrians in Persia, and put it down at 4,000 families. Treazel, 1807-9, raises it to 8,000 Guebres in Yezd and in the neighboring villages, Christie, 1819, and Fraser, 1821, count about 3,000 families in all Persia. Abbott, 1845, lowers the number to 800 families in Yezd and in the surrounding places. Peterman, 1854, counts 3,000 families, of whom 1,200 men are in Yezd. Goldsmith, 1865, 4,500 Guebres in Yezd and Kerman, and finally Captain Evan Smith, 1870, 3,800 families. 550 The Parsis of Bandar Abbas. They are both situated on the confines of two extensive deserts, the Dasht Kabur and the Dasht Ilat, which, to the north, cover an area of over 500 miles, and which are separated by a chain of rocky mountains through which the caravans trace their way with difficulty. This region is feared by travelers, and is hardly known to Europeans. Yezd too communicates with the rest of Iran. Only 2 young officers of the Indian Army have lately attempted to cross the frightful solitudes of Dasht Kabur. CPROC of the RGS, November, 1891, and Asiatic Quarterly Review, October, 1891. Dasht Isut has been more easy to explore, although the danger is not less, owing to the clouds of sand raised by the winds. To Yezd. Yezd enjoys a temperate climate. It is surrounded by canals and aqueducts which carry the water into the interior of the town. There are constructed there reservoirs and cisterns, structures as remarkable as those which are seen at Kaskan. Most of the houses and edifices, although built of raw bricks, are of great solidity. Besides, the rainfall is very scarce in that country. The town is well built and very clean, because care is taken to have the rubbish removed every day from it, which rubbish is used to manure the fields. Wheat, cotton, and silk are produced there, but the wheat is not abundant enough to suffice for food, and some wheat is therefore imported from Kerman and Skyraz, so that its price is somewhat high. Among the fruits of Yezd are praised figs, called miscali, and pomegranates. The inhabitants, formerly Shafi'ites, belong now to the Shiite sect. They are almost all weavers, and are the Zoroastrians in Persia 51 by the caravan roads. On leaving the argillaceous plateaus, the rocks, and the sandhills, the town and the villages around seem to emerge from a veritable oasis of mulberry trees. The desert begins at the very foot of the walls, where the sand driven by the tempests is heaped up. A line of ruins surrounds it and testifies to its known for their honesty and by their gentleness, which degenerates even into weakness. Hamd al-Mustofi, while doing justice to the loyalty of the merchants, accuses the brokers of that town of intolerable arrogance and pride. Zinet el-Medjalis. Cf. Najat, FOL 602. C.B. de Maynard, Diet, Geographic, Hist, and c. p. 611, Note I. During nearly 2 centuries the governors, Atabegs, of Yezd, like those of Loristan, maintained their independence, but in the 13th century Ghazan Khan supplanted them. As for the modern travelers who have visited those regions, this is what is known of them. Marco Polo traversed Yezd in 1272, the monk Odoric in 1325, and Josepha Barbaro in 1474. It was then a city surrounded with walls nearly 5 miles in circumference, and well known by its silk trade. Tavernier, in the 17th century, stayed there for 3 days, enough to make him extol the fruits and the beauty of the women of that place. Similarly, in the 19th century the European savants made acquaintance with that region. Christie, having left Pottinger in Baluchistan, traversed it while returning from Herat, 1810. C. A. Dupré, 1808, Voyage in Persia, Vol. 2. C. H. Sly, Dr. A. Peterman, 1854, Reisen un Orient, Vol. 2. Ch. 12 pages 203 ETSEQ, Endicam Kopf, 1859, Memoir, pages 200 to 204, A. H. Schindler, 1879, Zeit F. Gesellschaft of Berlin, Curzon, 1889, Persia, Vol. 2 CHXXIII pages 238 to 243, London, 1892. 52. The Parsis' ancient extent. Yezd is, however, prosperous. It contains a population of from 70 to 80,000 inhabitants, composed of the most diverse elements, amongst others 2,000 Jews, still obliged to wear on their cloaks the badge of their disgrace, and some Hindus called to this place by their business affairs. There are 5 reservoirs, abambars, 50 mosques, 8 madrasas, and 65 public baths. A post office ensures a regular weekly service with Bandar Abbas and Bushehr. The Telegraph puts it in communication with Kerman and Isfahan. Commerce flourishes. About the middle of this century 1800 manufactories gave work to 9,000 workmen. Nowadays the number is, however, less. It is here that we find, grouped together, the scattered remnants of the Zoroastrian community. The Guebres gave themselves up chiefly to gardening and the cultivation of mulberry trees, notably of the species of brown fiber, the wearing of which was formerly incumbent on them. But a great change has taken place, and such a trader now possesses 1,000 camels. There are schools there, 4 fire temples, and several towers of silence. About 20 kilometers to the southwest is the town of Taft, where was the Zoroastrians in Persia 53 preserved for a very long time the permission to keep up openly the sacred fire. The community has a high priest, and also a lay chief, Ardeshir Meherban. Some of the Guebres are naturalized Englishmen, and thanks to them, for the last 50 years the trade of Yezd has grown by their intercourse with India. Their road is similar to that performed in the open ports of Japan by the compradors and the Chinese agents into whose hands nearly all business passes. This activity is due to the efforts of their co-religionists in India, for in spite of their recognized probity and practical intelligence, the Guebres have long been exposed to the most humiliating vexations. Kerman is the chief city of ancient Karamania. 1 Kerman. The word is written sometimes Kerman, but the first pronunciation seems more correct. It is a vast and populated country, situate in the third climate, longitude 90°, latitude 30°. It contains a great number of districts, towns, and boroughs. Its boundaries are, to the east, Makran and the desert which extends between Makran and the sea, near the country of the Balouth, Balochis, to the west, Fars to the north, the deserts of Khorasan and Setchistan, to the south, the Sea of Fars. On the frontier of Surjan, Kerman makes an angle and advances into the boundaries of Fars. It has also a bend on its southern sides. Kerman is rich in palm trees, corn, cattle, and beasts of burden. It offers an analogy to the province of Basra by the number of its rivers and the fertility of its territory. This is what has 54 the Parsis and stands in the center of 4 great highways which run from the south and the west. It's been said by Muhammad bin Ahmed el-Bashri, Kerman participates in the natural qualities of Fars. It resembles by its productions the country of Basra, and it has also some analogical reference to Khorasan. In fact, its sides are washed by the sea, it unites the advantages of hot and cold climates, it produces the nut tree and the palm tree, and yields in abundance the 2 best species of dates, and produces the most varied trees and fruits. Its principal cities are, Giraft, Menucan, Zarand, Bim, Surjan, or Skyrajan, Nirmazir, and Berdazir. Tutnag, Tausha, is collected there and is imported in large quantities. The inhabitants are virtuous, honest, and much attached to Sunnism and orthodoxy. But a great part of this country is depopulated and ruined, on account of the different masters who possessed it, and the tyrannical domination of its sultans. For many years, instead of having been governed by a particular dynasty, it has been administered by governors who have had no other occupation than to amass wealth and to make it pass into Khorasan. Now, this emigration of the resources of a country to the profit of another is one of the surest causes of its ruin. Besides, the presence of a king and a court contributes much to the prosperity of a state. The epoch of the glory and splendor of Kerman reaches to the reign of the Seljuk dynasty, and during that happy period, a great number of foreigners fixed their residence there. C. B. de Maynard, Diet, Geographic, Hist. and c. pages 482 et sec. Among the modern travelers who have visited Kerman since the commencement of the century, see Sir H. Pottinger, 1810, Travels in Baluchistan, Cap. X. Endokhonikov, 1859, Memoirs pages 186 to 198, Curzon, 1889, Persia Vol. 2 Chxxii. Pages 243 to 246. The Zoroastrians in Persia 55 situation makes it a very important center of commerce between the Persian Gulf and the markets of Khorasan, Bokhara, and Balkh. Of the 12,000 Gwebris who were formerly resident in this locality, there only remain, according to the census taken in 1878 by the orders of the governor, 1,341. At the time of the Arab invasion, Kerman served as a place of refuge for King Yezdezerd, and passed successively into the hands of the Beni Buzak, the Seljukides Turks, the kings of Khwarezm, Khiva, and a Karakitayan family which remained in power till the year 1300, and it was also the see of the Nestorian metropolitan bishopric of Pars. This city had to suffer much from the invasions, from the east and west, of Genghis Khan, Timur, the Afghans, and Nader Shah. The siege it sustained in 1494 is memorable for the massacres ordered by Aga Muhammad Khan. It was within its walls that the last of the family of the Zends, Lukta Khan, had taken refuge. Betrayed by one in 1878, the numbers were 39,718 Musalmans, 1,341 Parsis, 85 Jews, and 26 Hindus, which gives a total of 41,170 souls. The Hindus are Musulmans who have come for the most part from Sindh and Shikarpur. Some have established at Bahramabad some great commercial firms. 2 Malcolm, History of Persia, Vol. 2 Chxxi. p. 271. 56 The Parsis his followers, the young prince contrived, however, to escape the cruelty of the redoubtable Qajar eunuch. For 3 months the soldiers committed all sorts of excesses, the town was given up to plunder and finally razed. Little later, having been rebuilt by Fath Ali Shah, it recovered by degrees its ancient prosperity, thanks to a capable and at the same time avaricious and strict governor, Vakil ul-Mulk. The ruins of Kerman occupy a length of 3 miles. The modern town contained in 1879, 42 mosques, 53 public baths, 5 madrasas, 50 schools, 4 large and small bazaars, and 9 caravanserais. Its commerce is flourishing, the carpets and shawls manufactured there being very wonderful. The physical and moral condition of the Gwebris has changed very little in Persia. Their contact with the Musalmans has neither relaxed nor enervated that condition. The women, of one it is reported that the conqueror caused to be presented to himself on dishes 35,000 pairs of eyes. 30,000 women and children were reduced to slavery. It is at Bam, a small village 140 miles to the southeast of Kerman, that Lukta Khan was made a prisoner and delivered over to his enemy who, with his own hands, tore out his eyes before causing him to perish. Sir H. Pottinger saw, in 1810, a trophy of 600 skulls raised in honor of the victory of Aga Mohammed. The Zoroastrians in Persia 57, whom the majority belong to poor families, are renowned for their chastity, while the men are so famous for their morality that they are particularly employed in the gardens of the Shah. From an ethnographical point of view, this is what can be said. We follow the sum given by Musai *, when the Arabs by right of conquest imposed a new religion on the Persians, the fusion of the Turano-Aryans had been already for the greater part accomplished in the north and east of the empire. At this time there was no difference of race, manners, customs, or religion between the ancestors of the Mohammedan Persians and those of the real Guebres. Separated today as surely by their religion as by vast extent of space, they no longer commingle, but being descended from the same ancestors, and neither having undergone any modification since that period, we find them again today not unlike each other in the same region. The only ethnical element which could have been introduced among the Persian Mohammedans and not among the Guebres, 1 see Dulafay, Acropoliticis, and see Appendix, The Human Races of Persia, pages 87 and following. See also Duhusid, The Populations of Persia, pages 4-7, and Akhnikov, Ethnography of Persia, pages 19, 47, 50, 56, and c. 58. The Parsis would be the Semitic element due to the Arab conquerors. But it was not so. The soldiers of Islam were indeed sufficiently fanatical and violent to impose their laws and religion on the people, but not sufficiently numerous to effect any change in them. It would be practically quite the truth to say that this invasion has left no traces outside the families of the seeds. The language alone has felt its effects. All words connected with religion and government are Arabic. The Guebres should be all the less regarded as pure descendants of the Aryans, as they resemble their Mussulman neighbors, and are, on the other hand, not all of the same type. Those of Yezd have, according to Knikov, Aryan characteristics. It is not because they are Guebres, but because they dwell in a country adjoining Pars. Those of Tehran resemble the other inhabitants of Tehran. The Parsis of India, whose ancestors preferred exile to conversion, are more like the Parsis of Persia, and differ from their co-religionists of the north. Since their exodus, they have not at all mixed with the people who received them, they are such as they were then. Thus at the time of the Arabic conquest there was no single race. The ethnical distribution, which can be observed the Zoroastrians in Persia 59 even now, existed already. The Guebres who remained in Persia were the Turano-Aryans, the emigrants, who had chiefly started from the south of the kingdom, were Aryans. 1. The condition of the Zoroastrians who had remained behind in Persia had been, as we have said, always miserable. In 1511, they wrote to their co-religionists who had taken refuge at Naisari, that since the reign of Khaymer, they had not endured such sufferings, even under the execrable government of Zohak, Afrasiab, Tur, and Alexander. As a matter of fact, the connection between the two communities, which had been broken, was happily renewed since the end. 1 According to General Hudam Schindler, see memoir already cited, pages 82-84, the hairs of the Zoroastrians are smooth and thick, generally black, or of a dark brown color. One seldom meets with a clear brown color, never with the red. In Kerman some beards do assume this color, but they incline rather to the yellowish. The eyes are black, or of an intense brown, sometimes gray or blue, the eyebrows habitually thick and well furnished among men, delicate and well shaped among women. The complexion is generally tawny, the cheeks are colored only among some women. The inhabitants of the cities are pale in appearance, and not robust, we those of the towns are robust and well proportioned. Regret not to be able to insert certain types sent for us from Yezd, the printing of this work being too far advanced to enable us to make use of them. 60. The Parsis of the 15th century. At this period Changa Asa, a rich and pious Parsi of Naisari, had at his own expense sent a learned layman, Nariman Hashang, with the view of acquiring from the members of the Iranian clergy certain information regarding important religious questions. Parsi Prdkdsh, pages 67. In another letter to their CO religionists in India dated from Surf Abbot, September 1486, Nariman Hoshang declared that all the Iranians had been desiring for centuries to know if any of their CO religionists still existed on the other side of the world. After an absence of several years he returned to India, and 8 years later went back to Persia, where he collected the most curious information. These statements are confirmed by the letters of the Gwebris addressed to the Parsi community of India, 1511, in which it is said that since their departure from Persia to the arrival of Nariman Hoshang, in all 30 years, the Majdians had not known that their CO religionists had settled in India, and that it was only through Nariman Hoshang that they had come to know of it. From that period the relations between the Gwebris and the Parsis were sufficiently close. As far back as 1527, 1, Asa, from the Zoroastrians in Persia 61 Kambay, had gone to Persia and procured a complete copy of the Ardeshir of Namet. In 1626 the Parsis of Baruch, Surat, and Nayasari sent to Persia a learned man of Surat, Biman Aspandiyar, charged with numerous questions. He brought back the answers, and also 2 religious books, the Vishtaspyasht and the Visperd, Parsi Pairdkash, P.N. The information thus obtained by intelligent emissaries for a long time guided the Parsis in their decisions regarding social and religious questions, and formed the collection of the Rafdiyats. At the same time the members of the community in India were not in a position to alleviate the miseries of their Persian brethren, and each century brought to the latter a new increase of sufferings and troubles. 4 revolutions contributed to the destruction of the Zoroastrian population of Kerman. The Ghilzi Afghans, who had long groaned under the yoke of the Persians, rose at last under the command of a brave and intelligent chief, called Mir Vais, who quickly made himself master of Kandahar. 1. The Persian monarch Hussein, powerless to reduce them by arms, tried to bring one Malcolm, History of Persia Vol. ICH 15. Pages 607 ETSEQ 62. The Parsis them back to a sense of duty by sending emissaries, who were however treated with contempt. The Afghan chief who succeeded Mir Vais resolved in his turn to be revenged by invading Persia as soon as an opportunity presented itself. It came soon. Whilst the northeast frontier of the kingdom was threatened by the Abdali Afghans of Herat, and whilst the Arabian prince of Muscat was taking possession of the coast of the Persian Gulf, Mahmud, who had succeeded his father, Mir Vais, in the government of Kandahar, made an irruption into Persia. This invasion of the Ghilzi Afghans was the greatest catastrophe to the Zoroastrian community, Mahmud having preferred to pass through Kerman rather than risk the deserts of Sistan. Massacres and forced conversions drove the faithful band to despair. At the time of the second invasion of Mahmud he persuaded the Zoroastrians of Yezd and Kerman to join his troops, and avenge the wrongs they had suffered for centuries. 1. It is needless to say that these unfortunates, too confiding, allowed themselves to be convinced and enlisted. What do we know of their ultimate fate? What became of them under the standard 1 Hanway, Vol. 2 p. 153. The Zoroastrians in Persia 63 of Mahmud after the victory of Isfahan? October 21, 1722, HH 351. Were they better treated, and did they receive any recompense? There is reason to believe that their condition, far from being ameliorated, became worse. It is said that under the reign of Nader Shah / and his successors, they had again to elect between the frightful alternative of conversion or death. At the time of the siege of Kerman, of which we have spoken, p. 55, many Zoroastrians were put to the sword, and their quarters laid waste and destroyed forever. This series of vicissitudes and misfortunes accounts for the small number of the survivors, their precarious life, their difficulties in the exercise of their religion, and the dispersion of their sacred books. In the time of Ibn Hawkal each village had its temple, its priests, and its sacred book. According to Mr. Dosabai Framji Karika, in 1858 there were 35 fire temples in Yezd and its environs. At present there are 4 in Yezd itself, 18 in the neighboring village, and 1 at Kerman. As for the sacred books, 1 Malcolm, History of Persia, Vol. ICH 15. p. 642. The chief of one of the corps of Guebres at the siege of Isfahan was called by the Musulman name of Nasr Allah. Hanway considers him as a Parsi or Guebra. 64. The Parsis, there are only those that are to be found in India. Westergaard, who visited Persia in 1843, writing to his friend the late Dr. Wilson of Bombay, to inform him of his disappointment, one says, "I have stopped in Yezd for 11 days, and although I have mixed in their gatherings, I have seen but 16 or 17 books in all, 2 or 3 copies of the Vendidad Sad and of the Izasnt, which they call Yasna, and 6 or 7 copies of the Khorda Avesta. I have only been able to obtain 2 and a portion of a third, a part of the Bzamdish and of another Pahlavi book. That is all that I have succeeded in obtaining, in spite of all my efforts to get more. For instance, the fragments of the Izashni with a Pahlavi or Pazent translation, of which there is only 1 copy in Europe, that at Copenhagen." The same traveller, speaking of the Zoroastrians who at present reside in Kerman, expresses himself in these terms: "The Guebres there are more maltreated than their brethren in Yezd. They have only 2 copies of the Vendidad and of the Yasna and a rather large number of the Khorda Avesta, with which, however, they will 1 letter from Professor W. to the Reverend Dr. Wilson, written in 1843, in Journ. As of Great Britain and Ireland, Vol. 8, 1846, p. 350. The Zoroastrians in Persia 65 not part. Here nobody reads Pahlavi. They complain bitterly of Aga Muhammad Khan having given up the city to plunder, of the destruction of most of their sacred books, and of the massacre of the faithful. One of the harshest conditions of the conquest of Persia had been at all times a tax called jizya. The Mohammedans are the only persons exempted from this tax, all the other infidel inhabitants of the kingdom, Armenians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, being subject to it. The Armenians of Taurus and of the villages of Persia situated near the frontier have been relieved of this tax by the care of the Russian government. It is difficult to arrive at an estimate of the tax paid by the Armenians and the Jews, but this is certain, and the fact has been verified, that the annual tax imposed upon the Zoroastrians rose to 660 tomans. The governors and collectors having gone on increasing its amount in order to profit by the surplus, the sum rose to nearly 2,000 tomans, or 1,000 sterling, about 25,000 francs of our money. According to statistics, 1,000 Zoroastrians were compelled to pay. Of these 200 could pay it without difficulty, 400 with much trouble, the rest could not do so even under 666 the Parsis' threats of death. Lamentable scenes have ensued at the time of the collection of this onerous tax. Sometimes these unfortunate beings turned to their brethren in India in the hope of obtaining a favorable intervention with the Persian government, such as some of the European powers had effectually attempted in certain cases. Dishonored by the appellation of Guebres or infidels, they endured at the hands of the Musulmans sufferings similar to those endured in India by the members of the Mahar caste at the hands of the well-born Hindus. To all rela one cannot recount here odious details which a single word will characterize: they were veritable dragonnades. General Hudam Schindler ascertained that, before the abolition of the jizya, the position of the Guebres was good enough, and infinitely better than that of the Jews at Tehran, Kaskan, Shiraz, and Bushire, whilst at Yezd and in Kerman, on the contrary, the position of the Jews was preferable. The hardships endured were very cruel. See Hudam Schindler, memoir already cited, p. 57. Here are the principal grievances of the Guebres: they were threatened with forced conversion, property belonging to a Zoroastrian family was confiscated for the use and profit of the proselytes, in disregard to the rights of the legitimate heirs, property newly acquired was susceptible of being burdened with taxes for the benefit of the mullahs up to 1/5 of its value. There was a prohibition against building new houses and repairing old ones. The Guebres could not put on new or white coats, nor could they ride on horseback. the traders had to submit to taxes in addition to the government duties of the Zoroastrians in Persia's 67 chans. All intercourse with them were tainted with pollution, a host of lucrative occupations were forbidden to them. Moreover, we know the frightful inequality of laws in Mohammedan countries, where the general rule is to grant aid and protection to the true believers and to ignore these rights in the case of the infidels. Instances of this are too numerous to be quoted. We will content ourselves with pointing out this inequality without any further comment. 1j In the presence of this painful state of affairs, the Parsis in India could not remain indifferent. Mr. Dosabai Framji Karika wrote, a quarter of a century back, 2 Can we then do nothing for our unfortunate brethren in Persia? Our community has considerable funds and possesses men known throughout the world for their the custom house, and finally the murder of a Zoroastrian was not punished, and often sanctuaries were invaded and profaned. 1. It is well to notice that the Persian government, very careful to please the ambassadors of the European and Christian courts, accords voluntarily its protection to the natives who are in the neighborhood of the capital, but this protection ceases in the provinces where there prevails the rule of local governors maintained by the fanaticism of the inhabitants. 2. The Parsis, their history / manners, customs, and religion, ch. 2. Pages 49 etseq 68 The Parsis' benevolence and their noble efforts towards the amelioration of the condition of their co-religionists. It seems to us that a deputation from us to the court of Persia, presented and duly supported by the English ambassador at Tehran, might successfully attempt some negotiations with a view to put an end to the cruelty practiced every day. The amount raised by the capitation tax with such useless violence must be to the imperial treasury insignificant in the extreme, and there is no doubt that a representation from the Parsis of India has all chances of being favorably received. Persian princes seldom know the true state of their subjects, and we hope our countrymen will comprehend the honor that will be reflected on them by their efforts to relieve the miseries of our brethren in Iran. It was in 1854 that the first emissary from Bombay to the Zoroastrians in Persia was sent, and from that time, thanks to the Persian Zoroastrian Amelioration Fund, they seriously began to consider the means of aiding them. The trustees delegated Mr. Mainakji Limji Antaria, who was to utilize his great experience and his devotion in the accomplishment of the task he had accepted. He started, March 3 ist, the Zoroastrians in Persia 69 with instructions from the committee to open an inquiry and to send in a report. Very soon the most pathetic details came to excite the charitable zeal of the Parsis of Bombay. Meeting was called on January n. 1855, under the presidency of the late Mainakji Nasarwanji Peti, Parsi Prdkdsh, pages 654 et seg, to consider the resolutions to be adopted on the report of Mr. M. L. Antaria. 1. Before taking in hand all the evils set forth, it appeared specially important to direct all their efforts towards the abolition of the jizya, the chief cause of the complaints and miseries of the taxpayers. These efforts relaxed neither with time nor with obstacles, and after a campaign which lasted from 1857 to 1882 the desired abolition was finally obtained. During this period of 25 long years all suitable means were taken to secure the success of the object aimed at. Thus Mr. M. L. Antaria profited by the kindly disposition of Sir Henry Rawlinson, the English ambassador at the court of Tehran, to get himself presented to one. The members of the committee were, Messrs. Mainakji Nasarwanji Peti, Rostamji Nusarwanji Wadia, Mirwanji Framji Pandey, Kavasji Ardeshir Sahar. 2. For the negotiations on the subject of the jizya see Parsi Prakash, pages 659 to 662. 70. The Parsis the Shah, and to lay before him a touching picture of the miseries suffered by his Zoroastrian subjects of Kerman. At the end of the audience he succeeded in obtaining a reduction of 100 tomans from the amount of the contribution annually raised, 920 tomans, in Yazd and in Kerman. Another audience was granted by the Shah in Buckingham Palace at the time of his voyage to England, June 24, 1873. A memorandum, drawn up in the most flowery and courteous style, such as Oriental politeness demands, was presented by several members of the Bombay Committee. One Sir Henry Rawlinson and Mr. E.B. Eastwick supported it. In his reply His Majesty thought fit to say that he had heard of the complaints of his subjects, and that he would consider the means of ameliorating the position of the Zoroastrians of Persia. But we know, alas, that in the East abuses take long in disappearing. In spite of the friendly promises of the Shah, there was no change made in the COL election of this tax. Pressing appeal through the English ambassador at Tehran did not even reach the monarch. It was only in 1882 that Sir Dinshaw Mainekji Peti, the president, won Messrs. Naorazji Fardunji, Dadabhoy Naorazji, Ardeshir Karsheji Wadia, Dr. Rostamji Kabasji Bahadurji. The Zoroastrians in Persia 71 of the Persian Zoroastrian Amelioration Fund, received through the medium of Mr. Thompson, of the English Embassy, the communication of the royal firman decreeing the immediate abolition of the tax, Parsi paired cash, p. 662. This long struggle has cost the Persian Amelioration Fund Q Bombay nearly 109,564 rupees, or about 257,475 francs. It is needless to say with what transports of joy and gratitude the spoon was received by the unfortunate victims, who for centuries had groaned under the exactions of subordinate officials, and whom the enlightened kindness of the sovereign placed at once on a footing of equality with his other subjects. As one here is a translation of the text of the firman relieving the Zoroastrians of Persia from the impost of the jizya, in consideration of the innumerable benedictions which it has pleased the Almighty to accord to us, and as an act of grace towards him who has given us the royal crown of Persia, with the means of promoting the welfare of its inhabitants, has devolved on us the duty of securing tranquility and happiness for all our subjects, to whatever tribe, community, or religion they belong, so that they may be profited and refreshed by the beneficent waters of our special favor. Amongst these are the Zoroastrians of Yezd and Kerman, who are descended from the ancient and noble race of Persia, and it is now our desire to make their peace and well-being more complete than before. That is why, by this royal firman, we ordain and command that the taxes and imposts of the crown, levied previously on 72 the Parsis to the friends of the Majdian communities of Iran, they may hope to see them prosper and their numbers increase under the influence of the same qualities and virtues which have contributed to the greatness and prosperity of the Zoroastrians of India. Our Musulman subjects of Yezd and Kerman, may be recovered in the same way from the Zoroastrians who reside there. In this manner the impost which exacts from this community the sum of 845 tomans, is abolished, and in the commencement of this propitious year of the horse, we make an abatement of this sum and free the Zoroastrians from it forever. Therefore order and command our mustaujis and officers of the debt of the royal exchequer to remove it from the revenues which have to be paid in by Yezd and Kerman. The governors now in office, or who will be nominated subsequently at the head of these provinces, ought to consider all right to the payment of this tribute abolished forever, and, as regards the present year, and the following years, if this sum should happen to be exacted, they will be held responsible and will be punished for it. Moreover, in the tribute of the tithes and imposts on water and land, and for all trade duties, the Zoroastrians must be treated in the same manner as our other subjects. Given at Tehran, in the month of Ramzan, 1299, August, 1882, and c. 1. The committee has now a fund of 275,000 Rs, 646,250 francs, made up of subscriptions and of gifts made on the occasion of marriages or after the death of relatives, at the Uthamna ceremony of the third day. Out of these funds are supported 12 schools, opened in 1882 in Tehran, Yezd, and Kerman. The Zoroastrians in Persia 73. The relations between Bombay and Persia were not confined to the single benevolent initiative of the Bombay Committee. One should also notice the establishing of schools in the towns of Yezd and Kerman, 1857, due to the munificence of the Parsi notabilities, and the pecuniary gifts given for the purpose of settling in life young girls exposed on account of their poverty to terrible dangers in a Mahomedan country. Between 1856 and 1865 nearly 100 Majdian women were thus got married by the care of the agent of a WE charitable association. May also mention the establishment of dispensaries and houses of refuge, and should not omit to include in this brief list the founding of 2 monuments, which throws a very interesting light on the direction of the religious ideas of the modern Parsis. 2 localities, situated not far from Yezd and held sacred by tradition, Kohichukmaku and Okta, preserved the memory of their ancient glorious days through a legend concerning the one Mr. Menekji Limji Antaria is dead, but his successor is not as zealous. The present president is Serdinshaw Menekji Peti, and the honorary secretary Mr. Bomanji Bairamji Pasiu. 74 The Parsis 2 daughters of Yezdezerd, Katun Banu and Hayat Banu, who had at one time disappeared without leaving any trace behind them. After the fall of the king, his family, finding no protection in Madam, had taken refuge in the citadel of Haftajar, but they were soon obliged to disperse. Mayor Banu shut herself up in the fortress of Gorab. Katun Banu directed her steps to more secret places. In her hasty march the princess, exhausted and dying of thirst, met a Berdigav, farmer, busy cultivating the soil, and asked of him a little water to drink. There being no stream or tank near, the peasant offered her his cow's milk, and commenced milking the animal, but the moment the vessel overflowed, with the fresh and foaming liquid, the cow with a kick upset it. The unfortunate girl, thus deprived of this last comfort, feverishly continued her way, and reaching the mountain in an agony of despair, threw herself upon the ground, praying to the Almighty to protect her, either by stopping the pursuit of her enemies or by screening her from mortal sight. Hardly had she finished her prayer when she disappeared in a cleft of the rocks, which opened before her and closed upon her immediately. At the same moment the Berdigar, who had dissed the Zoroastrians in Persia 75, covered the retreat of the princess, arrived with a refreshing drink, only to find her little band of mourning followers. On hearing of her strange disappearance he ran to his stable and sacrificed the cow in the very place where the king's daughter had disappeared. Soon the faithful ones came to offer, in their turn, similar sacrifices, and the place was called Daridin, the Gate of Faith. Hosts of pilgrims repaired to this place every year, but these sacrifices of blood were repugnant to the feelings of the Parsis of Bombay. However, as it was right and seemly to honor a place marked out by ancient tradition, Mr. Menekji Limji Antaria substituted in the place of this barbarous custom ceremonies more in accordance with modern Zoroastrian practices. The sacrifice of the cow was suppressed, and an influential member of the Bombay community furnished means to raise a beautiful monument with spacious quarters to lodge the pilgrims. Hayat Banu, the other princess, disappeared in an equally mysterious manner. On the spot Sec by legend a grand reservoir, fed from neighboring springs, has been erected. The walls of this reservoir having gradually fallen into ruins, they were repaired by the generous 76 the Parsis care of Mr. Mir Wanji Framji Pandey, the same gentleman who erected the monument at Okta. We reserve for a subsequent work certain documents which we have been able to collect on the subject of the Zoroastrian communities of Persia. Chapter 3 Population Costumes Usages Festivals. It is on the western coast of India, in the Bombay Presidency, that we find the most compact gathering of the members of the Parsi community. Since their exodus from Persia the refugees here have maintained themselves successfully, and have gradually acquired wealth and the intellectual superiority which distinguishes them from the other natives of India. The Bombay Presidency, or, to be more exact, the province of Bombay, comprises 24. Originally the affairs of the 3 establishments of the East India Company, in Bengal, Madras, and Bombay, were administered separately, each with a president and a council formed of agents of the company. The name of presidency was applied to the whole territory subject to this authority. This expression has no longer its real signification, however, it is still employed in official acts. British India is no longer 77-78 the Parsis British districts, and 19 native states, agencies, under the protection of the English government. Its boundaries are, to the north, the state of Balochistan, the Punjab, and the native states of Rajputana; to the east, the Maratha state of Indore, the central provinces, western Berar, and the states of the Nizam of Hyderabad; to the south, the Madras Presidency and the state of Mysore, and to the west, the Arabian Sea. It is divided into 4 great divisions, made according to the local dialects. On the north lies Sindh, or the lower valley and delta of the Indus, a region essentially Mohammedan both historically and as regards the population; then more to the south, Gujarat, containing, on the contrary, the most diverse and mixed elements, and comprising all the districts of the northern coast, the Maratha country, and the interior districts of the Deccan, and, finally, the provinces where the Kanarasa language is spoken, divided in their turn into 4 British districts and 8 native states. 1 divided into presidencies, but into provinces, 8 of which are very extensive countries, having separate governments. The presidencies of Bombay and Madras are today only the provinces of those names. 1. Its territory extends from latitude 2847 to 1353 n, and from latitude 6043 to 7630 e British districts. In population 79, this territory has been formed little by little round the island of Bombay, ceded to England by the King of Portugal as the dowry of the Infanta Catherine of Braganza. The Portuguese were the first to occupy these parts. In 1498 they arrived at Calicut with Vasco da Gama, and 5 years later, thanks to the bravery of Albuquerque, they took possession of Goa. Bombay came into their possession in 1532, and for 100 years they managed to maintain themselves at the head of commerce and to traffic. Rival factories, one English and the other Dutch, were established in Surat in 1613 and 1618. It must be stated that the acquisition of the island of Bombay gave but eluding Sindh, contain a total superficial area of 124,465 square miles, and a population, according to the census of 1,872, of 16,349,206 souls. The native states cover a surface of nearly 71,769 square miles, with a population of 8,831,730 inhabitants, which gives, for the surface, a total of 196,234 square miles, and for the population a total of 25,180,936 inhabitants. The state of Baroda is no longer under the direct administration of Bombay, but under that of the supreme government. We may, however, consider it from the geographical point of view as forming a part of Bombay. The Portuguese possessions of Goa, Daman, and Diu, with a superficial area of 1,146 square miles and a population of nearly 428,955 souls, are equally comprised in the limits of the Presidency. CIMP Gazetteer of India Vol. 2 p. 172, ed. of 1881. 80. The Parsis little pleasure to the English, for in 1668, on account of great difficulties, the king transferred it to the East India Company, and in 1686 the control of all the possessions of the company was transferred from Surat to Bombay, which was made into an independent presidency, 1708, at the time of the amalgamation of the 2 English companies. Finally, in 1773, Bombay was placed in a state of dependence under the Governor-General of Bengal, who has since been replaced by the Viceroy of India. It is from Bombay that the English have spread their influence at present so firmly established in these territories. Simply merchants at first, they gradually supplanted their rivals from the Portuguese and Dutch settlements. Soon they aspired to a more solid power, and came into direct conflict with the natives, the Mahrattas, whom they hastened to drive from Kolaba, finding their nearness troublesome. After the First Maratha War, which arose from the contested succession of the Peshwa, 1774, the Treaty of Sal Bay permitted the English to settle in Sals et Elephanta, Karangia, Hawk Island, and c. 1782. The fort of Surat was in their hands from 1759, and in 1800 the administration of this town was made over to them by /population 81 the Nawab, whose descendants contented themselves with the vain title till 1842. The Second Maratha War had its origin in the Treaty of Bassein, 1802, by which the Peshwa accepted the subsidiary system, a system since adopted by the English. It resulted in an accession of territory in Gujarat and an increase of moral influence in the court of the Peshwas and of the Gakwars. The interval of peace was employed in repressing the invasions of the pirates who were infesting the gulfs of Cambay and Kutch. In 1870 the states of Kathiawar were placed under the British protectorate, and in 1809 the Rao of Kutch was forced to sign a treaty by which he bound himself to help in the destruction of the pirates, whilst, on the other hand, scarcely had the Peshwa Baji Rao been placed on the throne by an English army when he began plotting for the expulsion of the English from the Deccan. In 1817 he attacked the resident himself, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, who withdrew to Kirki, where with a few troops he succeeded in routing the entire army of the Peshwa. Soon after the prince submitted to a Sir John Malcolm. Pension of 80,000 was secured to the prince, but he was deprived of 782 the Parsis his states, and Bombay gained in this manner the districts of Pune, Ahmednagar, Nasik, Kolhapur, Belgaum, Kaliji, Darwar, Ahmedabad, and the Konkan. At the same time Holkar abandoned his rights over the districts of Khandesh, and Satara fell into the hands of the English in 1848 on the death of the last descendant of the Maratha Shivaji. In N 1860 the unregulation districts one of the Panchmahals were ceded by Scindia, and in 1886 the southern limits of the presidency were still further extended by the annexation of the northern district of Kannada taken from Madras. From this time the history of the Bombay presidency is free of incidents. Peace reigned, even at the time of the mutiny of 1857. The local army has, however, rendered important services in Afghanistan, Persia, Burma, China, Aden, and Abyssinia. Entirely occupied in administrative reforms and the welfare of the country, the government has attained a state of complete prosperity under such men as Mount Stuart Elphinstone, Malcolm, and Lord Touray. 1 See for the explanation of this word, Sir John Strachey, India, Prev. And Trans, of J. Harmand, Chapter 6. p. 145, Paris, 1892. 2 See Sir William Wilson Hunter, KCSI, Bombay 1885 to 1890, A Study in Indian Administration. London, 1892. Population 83. According to the General Census of 1891 leaders, the number of Parsis in India rose to 89,904, that is, an increase of 4*91 over that of the I-7th of February, 1881, which gave a total of 85,397. On the 26th of February, 1891, the entire population of the Bombay Presidency, including the native states and Aden, formed a total of 26,960,421 inhabitants, 2 of whom 76,774 were Parsis, 39,285 males and 37,489 females. The surplus is divided between Madras, Bengal, and the districts of the Gakwar of Baroda, where is to be seen among other flourishing settlements the ancient community of Nayasari. To this number must be added the Parsis of one. The whole population of India comes to 287,223,431, Brahmins, 207,731,727, Aboriginal tribes, 9,280,467, Sikhs, 190,783, Jains, 1,416,633, Zoroastrians, 89,904, Buddhists, 7,131,361, Jews, 17,194, Christians, 2,284,380, Mussulmans, 58,321,164, diverse races, 42,763. See Statistical Abstract relating to British India from 1883 to 84 to 1892 to 93, November 28, London, 1894. Distribution of population according to religion, sex, and civil condition, and c. p. 26, number 14. 2 Parsis, 76,774, Hindus, 21,440,957, Mussulmans, 439,995, Christians, 170,009, Jains, 555 2Q9, Jews, I 3,547, Aboriginal tribes, 292,023, Buddhists, 674, Sikhs, 912, Brahmo Samaj, 34, diverse races, 51. In no part of India are religions and sects so mixed up as in the Presidency of Bombay. See Ethnology of India by Mr. Justice Campbell, in / and Journal of the Asiatic Society. Supplementary number, Vol. XXXVPT2. Pages 140, and C 84. The Parsis China, and of some foreign localities, and the Iranians, 9,269 in number. The exact number of Zoroastrians scattered over the globe we thus find to be 100,000 at the most. We refer to the Zoroastrian calendar for all information concerning statistics, and in a special chapter, pages 119 ETSEQ we find a detailed list of the population of the city and the presidency of Bombay. One take from it the following table, see next page, which gives the assessment of the population in the different centers. Occupying the first rank we find Bombay with its 47,458 Parsis, and Surat with 12,757 / then Broj, Thana, Pune, Karachi, down to the least of the localities, some of which stand for only a simple unit. 1. The Zoroastrian calendar for the year of Yezdezerd 1262, I6th September, 1892, to $T/I September, I, printed and published at the Bombay Vartman Press, by Muncherji Hosenji Jagosh, 1892, Gujarati. The tables are very carefully done. An inquisitive reader will find there the enumeration of the Parsi population of Bombay according to the different districts, comparisons with the previous census and remarks on the community. Population 85 Table of the Parsi population in the Bombay Presidency. Names of towns and districts. 86 The Parsis. Considering the importance of Bombay, we will quote from a paper on it, read by Mr. B. Patel before the Anthropological Society of Bombay. We find there the lists of births, deaths, and marriages in the city of Bombay from 1881 to 1890. During that period of time the average of births has risen per year to 1,450, and that of married women bearing children to 13*293%. The average of deaths has reached 1,135, 575 of the male sex, 500 of the female sex, and 92 stillborn, 52 of the male sex and 40 of the female sex. The annual average of mortality among children below the age of 5 years has been 469, 236 of the male sex and 233 of the female sex, between the ages of 5 and 10, 27, 13 of the male sex and 14 of the female sex, between the ages of 11 and 20, 47, 20 of the male sex and 27 of the female sex, between the ages of 21 and 30, 65, in the proportion of 27 to 38 for the two sexes, between the ages of 31 and 40, 62, in equal proportions for the two sexes. Between the ages of 41 and 60, 177, 67 males and 90 females. Above the age of 80 the average reaches 37, of whom 13 are males and 24 females. 1J Statistics of births, deaths, and marriages amongst the J Parsis of Bombay, during the last 10 years, in the Journal of the Anthropological Society of Bombay 2, November I, pages 55 to 65. Population 87. During these 10 years, 4 persons have died at the age of 100, 2 at the ages of 101 and 105, no, and lastly 1 at the age of years. These centenarians have been all women. The principal cause of mortality among Parsis is fever, table D, thus of 1,135 deaths, 293 may be attributed to it, 150 to nervous disorders, 91 to affections of the respiratory organs, 70 to dysentery, 38 to phthisis, 100 to old age, and the rest to diverse other causes, such as measles, pleurisy, diarrhea, and C. According to the table drawn up by Mr. Patel, Table E, the highest rate of mortality in Bombay is in the fort, and next to it in Dobatalau, Bayercote, Ketwadi, and C., in proportion to the population of these localities. After the crisis of 1865 a serious decrease of the population in Bombay had been apprehended for a time, but it was an exaggerated fear which disappeared with the census of 1881. It has been proved, on the contrary, that the conditions of life among the Parsis, both as regards mortality and hygiene, have reduced the average of mortality among the individuals, grown-up men, women, and children. These latter, well-tended and carefully brought up, supply a splendid race, susceptible of culture, and endowed with perfect health. AC accordingly, from 1872 to 188 the Parsi population 88 the Parsis has increased nearly 10%. This increase has continued, and, as we have said, the highest increase has been estimated in 1891 to be 491st. It is in vain that communities of Parsis have been sought for outside those regions which we have indicated. About 60 years ago a Mahomedan traveller did try to persuade others of the existence of a Parsi colony at Khotan, a country situated to the southeast of Kashgar, but Sir Alexander Burns, in a communication to Mr. Naoroji Fardunji, dissipated this illusion. 2. We refer to the Parsi Prakash, for all those interesting details, those of our readers who can read and understand Gujarati. 2. If I have not yet replied to your letter of the I-9th November, he writes, it is because I desired to make special researches concerning the strange rumor which has been spread by the Syed on the subject of a tribe of Parsis established at Khotan, remaining faithful to the Zoroastrian customs, and still governed by its own kings. I can tell you that it is a legend devoid of foundation, and that Major Rawlinson, so learned in these matters, partakes of my view. I suppose that the Syed, seeing the prosperous condition of his co-religionists in Bombay, imagined that in flattering your vanity he would act on your purse. Besides, the country of Khotan is not the terra incognita which he has depicted. I have been in touch with the people who have sojourned there. It is a dependency of China, inhabited by Mussulman subjects of the empire. The only Chinese who are there form part of the Gari Sun. According to all that has been said to me of Khotan and the adjacent countries, the only difficulty I have had is to define population 89. We cannot attach any more importance to an assertion recently put forward, and according to which the members of the tribe of the Shia-Posh Kafirs, inhabiting the country to the northeast of Kabul, are descendants of the same race, because certain of their usages, as for example their manner of exposing their dead, are similar to those of the Zoroastrians. Sir Alexander Burns in narrating his travels in Kabul in 1836-37-38, relates that the most curious of all the visitors to the country of the Kafirs too was a man who came from Kabul towards the year 1829. He gave himself out as a Gwebra, fire worshipper, and an Ibrahimi, follower of Abraham, who had quitted Persia to find some traces of his ancestors. During his sojourn in Kabul he willingly mixed with the Armenians and used to get himself called Shiryar, a name common enough among the modern Parsis. They tried, but in vain, to dissuade him from risking himself amongst the Kafirs. He went to Jalalabad and Lughman, who are the Christian traders who frequent those markets. I think that they are Russians or Nestorian Christians. 1 C. Kaboi, being a narrative of a journey to, and residence in that city in the years July 8, 1836, by the late Lieutenant Col. Sir Alexander Burns. London, 1842. 2. Vivian St. Martin, New Dictionary of Universal Geography, Vol. 3 p. 9. Paris, 1887. 90. The Parsis, where he left his baggage, and as a simple beggar entered Kafiristan by way of Nujajid. He was absent several months, and on his return was assassinated by the Huzaras of the tribe of Ali Parast. Malik Usman, furious at the conduct of his countrymen, exacted a fine of Rs 2,000 as compensation for the blood shed by them. All these details were given by the Armenians of Kabul to Sir Alexander Burns, but he could not discover whether the unfortunate Shiryar was a Parsi of Bombay or a Gwebra of Kerman. However, a document found in the possession of the traveller, and coming from the Shah of Persia, leads us to believe that the latter hypothesis is the true one. The census of 1881 enables us to state some interesting facts, which give us an idea of the occupati.on.s of the Parsis of Bombay, and of the kind of life led by them. Thus there were at that time 855 priests and persons devoted to religion, 141 teachers, 34 schoolmistresses, 33 engineers, 1,384 clerks, and 115 employees. Naval construction seemed to be one of their favorite occupations. 4 out of 46 shipbuilders, 26 were Parsis. As for the dubashis or shipbrokers, out of a total of 159, 146 were Parsis. All professions and manual trades were largely represented, with population 91 the exception of that of tailor, which was exercised by only one member of the community. At one time, out of 9,584 beggars in the town of Bombay, there were only 5 Parsis and 1 Parsi woman. As to the class of the unfortunate victims of vice and debauchery, a Parsi has not hesitated to affirm that not one of his co-religionists could have been accused of living on the wages of shame. Travelers have made the same remarks. Thus, according to Mendel's law, adultery and lewdness were considered by the Parsis as the greatest sins they could commit, and which they would doubtless have punished with death if they themselves had the administration of justice. See We Voyages, and C. Trans. Wickford, p. 184. May state in this connection that Ain Quatil gives a precise account of a summary execution under the sanction of the Panchayat, and with the approbation of the Mahomedan governor of Bharuch, see Zendavesta, Vol 2 p. 606, and Staverinus, at the end of the century, makes mention of Parsi women who had been preserved in the right path by the fear of punishment. See Voyages, and C. Vol I, CHXXVIIIP 363. 1 returned herself as living on the wages of shame. See Dosabai Framji Karika, Hist, of Parsis, Vol. I Chapter 3. p. 99. 92. The Parsis. The following is a division, under 7 heads, of the occupations of the Parsis, as shown in the census of 1881, population 93. As to their apparent repugnance for military service, we will see what an enlightened Parsi, who has in this case made himself the spokesman of his co-religionists, has to say. As a matter of fact, the Persians in olden times had distinguished themselves amongst all by their valor and courage. In the inscription engraved on his tomb at Nichiroustam, King Darius might well say, with a just feeling of pride, that they had only to look at the images of those who supported his throne to know into what distant places the Persian soldier had carried his arms. The famous struggles maintained by the Ardeshirs, the Shapurs, and the Nashirvans show that this warlike temper had not subsided. Why then to agricultural or pastoral occupations, and exhorted them to continue such traditions. Since then a rich Parsi of Bharuch, Mr. Rostamji Mainekji, has taken on lease from the chief of Rajpipla, a great stretch of land in the Panjmahals, and has cultivated it with success. He has been outstripped by Kabasji Framji Banaji in his beautiful domain of Pawai. Lord Mayo has highly recognized the great importance of agricultural studies, and in 1870 he declared that the progress of India in riches and in civilization depended on the progress of agriculture. See Strachey, India, Trans. Harmand, Chapter 9. Hunter, Bombay, 6*:, about the question of agricultural education, Chapter 6 pages 158, 159 to 166, and about the foundation of a chair of agriculture at Baroda under the auspices of the Gakor, at the suggestion of Lord Ray, p. 168. 94 The Parsis should the descendants of such heroes abstain from taking part in military exercises and in defending the country*. Mr. Dosabai Framji Karika gives the following explanation of this aversion. 2. In the first place he indignantly repudiates the theory put forward by certain European authors that it proceeds purely from religious motives, on account of the worship they are supposed to pay to fire, which would prevent them from handling a cannon or shouldering a gun. Nothing at all in fact prevents them from making use of fire in the handling of offensive and defensive weapons. At the time of certain riots in Bombay, gunsmiths' shops were seen to be rapidly emptied by the Parsis, and 35 years back they were enthusiastic in joining the first volunteer movement, but in 1877 only Europeans were invited to join. Still, protests Mr. D. F. Karika, there are certainly no natives more eager than the Parsis to share in the defense of British interests. In several places they have joined the volunteers. 1c for the army in India, Strachey, India, Trans. Harmand, Chapter 3. Pages 52 ETSEQ, Hunter, Bombay, SRV, Chapter 14. Pages 448 ETSEQ 2 Dosabai Framji Karika, Hist, of the Parsis Vol. I pages 101 ETSEQ population 95 and have obtained much envied distinctions. 1. They are able to attain a high degree of skill in the handling of firearms, for example, Mr. Durabji Padamji, son of the late Khan Bahadur Padamji Pestanji, is one of the best shots in India. 2. Most serious consideration which prevents the Parsi from enrolling himself in the army seems therefore, to us, to be the insufficiency of the pay. We only repeat it, it is a Parsi who says this. We have no desire either to weaken their motives or to exaggerate their grievances. Are well aware that these are very delicate questions, and require to be treated with care and skill, since they concern the relations of devoted subjects with a government of which they are proud. On 1. The enrollment of the Parsis as volunteers, to the exclusion of the other nationalities, has reappeared since the publication of the work of Mr. D. F. Karika. At Quetta, at Karachi, at Pune the Parsis are admitted freely into the corps of the European volunteers, and lastly, June, 1894, Mr. Dinshaw Dosabai Kambata is enrolled as a lieutenant in the Pune volunteers, he is now a lieutenant in the Quetta Corps. 2. Padamji Pestanji is the chief of the Parsi community of Pune. Since the last riots, he obtained as a reward of his services the title of Khan Bahadur. He is a member of the Legislative Council and has the rank of a Sardar of the first class in the Deccan. 96. The Parsis, the other hand, when we take into consideration the moral worth and intelligent cooperation which the Parsis bring to the service of this same government, we are not at all surprised at the conclusion which we see so clearly formulated. Native soldiers, whether Hindus or Mussulmans, are paid at the rate of 7 rupees a month, about 14 shillings, 17 Fr 50c, including rations, while a Parsi filling the most modest employment of a cook or a servant earns double that sum. During certain disturbances when Bombay was deprived of its European troops, Many Parsis would willingly have enrolled themselves in the army if they had been given the pay of European soldiers. It is a matter of regret to them, perhaps a sort of degradation of which they feel the keenness, at being obliged to put forward pecuniary considerations, but their mode of life, even that of the poorest among them, cannot be compared with that of Hindus and Mussulmans of the same we have not the slightest hesitation in saying that the Parsis would be found to be as good and brave soldiers as the Anglo-Saxons, while their loyalty and attachment to the government they are called upon to serve would always be above suspicion. See Hist. O.J. the Parsis, Vol. I. Chapter 3. p. 103. Population 97 Class. These can live on 7 rupees a month. Hindus and Mahomedans of the same family are content with 1 room, a thing which the humblest Parsi would never allow. The Hindu or Mussulman woman hardly requires more than 1 or 2 saris, costing about 3 rupees, to clothe herself, and her children can go naked till the age of 10 years. But as for the Parsi woman, she requires several saris, trousers, shirts, and slippers, besides suitable clothing for her children. Can a Parsi soldier then manage to live and bring up his family on 7 rupees a month? Mr. Karika ends his long and eloquent appeal with a sentence which sounds the true keynote of the regret felt by the Parsis at being merely compared with the natives when they felt themselves to be morally and intellectually their superiors. Are they not provided with commissions in the army like the Germans and other Europeans? Then only will they feel completely identified with the British nation. 214 If a German or a European of another nationality can secure a commission in the British army, why should not a Parsi, who is the born subject of the Queen Empress? See Hist. of the Parsis, Vol. I. Chapter 3 p. 104. 2 opinions are divided amongst the Parsis themselves on the subject of their nationality and position in India. The 8q8 The Parsis in India are divided into 2 sects, the Shahanshahis and the Kadmis. 1 When Ainquitil Duparan visited India, this division already existed, and he found them more excited against each other than the Mahomedan sects of Omar and The Parsis, however, do not admit this. This division has nothing to do with their faith, and has nothing in common with the division between the Shias and the Sunnis. The schism too has arisen simply out of a difference of opinion concerning the exact date of computation of the era of Yezdezerd, the last king of the ancient Persian monarchy. This division does not exist amongst the Zoroastrians who have remained behind in their own country. Honorable Mr. P. M. Mehta considers them as natives to the backbone. Mr. Dadabhai Naoroji, MP, is of the same opinion, whilst a certain number decline to recognize this. 1 The name of Shahanshahi means imperial, and that of Kadmai is drawn from Kadim ancient. The Shahanshahis are also called Rasmus, from Razam custom, that is to say, that which is followed in India. 2 On this schism, see Ainquitil Duparan, Zendavesta Disc. Pre-LP Uktsi, Wilson, The Parsi Religion, pages 35, 36, Hogg, Essays, pages 57, 58. Aspandi R.G. Camden resumed the controversy of the Kabaisa in a book appearing in Surat, in a 1826, historical account of the ancient leap year of the Parsis, Gujarati. Mr. K. R. Kama held, in 1869, a series of conferences on the ancient computation of time, and has published the era of Yezdezerd, Gujarati. Population 99 The Parsis reckon their year on a calculation of 365 days, each month consisting of 30 days. Their year commences with the month of Farvardin, and ends with the month of Spendarmid. At the end of 360 days, 5 days, called the Gathas, are added. The period of 5 hours and 54 seconds does not enter into their computation. The old Persians, therefore, in order to make their calculation agree with the solar year, had made at the end of every 120 years an intercalation or kabaisa, that is to say, they added 1 month to that period. The Persian Zoroastrians, after the loss of their independence, either through ignorance or simple forgetfulness, had ceased to practice this kabaisa, whilst the Parsis had continued this intercalation during their residence in Khorasan. Hence the origin of the sects with which we have to deal. In I-7201 Jamis Vilayati, a learned Zoroas, 1. This is how Ainquitil Duparan relates the incidents of this memorable asterisk struggle. About 46 years ago there came from Kerman a very clever dastur named Jamisp. He had been sent to reunite the Parsis divided on the question of the Pinam, a double piece of cloth with which the Parsis, on certain occasions, cover a part of the face. Some wished that asterisk disc. Pre-L pages Uktsi. Etsequio the Parsis Trian from Persia, settled in Surat to advise the Mobeds, and it was he who discovered that his co-religionists of India were 1 month behind their Iranian brethren. Little importance how it should be placed on the dead, others did not like this. Jamisp decided in favor of the latter, according to the custom of Kerman. If this dastur had not made the voyage to India, this frivolous contest would have caused streams of blood to flow. Jamisp is believed to have which was current in Gujarat. Examined the Vendidad, he found the Pahlavi translation of it too long and not correct in several places. Ignorance was the predominating vice of the Parsis of India. In order to remedy it, the dastur of Kerman formed some disciples, Darab at Surat, Jamisp at Nayasari, and a third at Bharuch, to whom he taught Zend and Pahlavi. Some time after, tired of the contradictions which he had to endure, he returned to Kerman. The books which this dastur has left in India are an exact copy of the Zend and Pahlavi Vendidad, the Faruiska, the translation of the Vatjagurd, and the Narengwestan. These two works are in Persian, mixed with Zend, and purely on ceremonials. Darab, the first disciple of Jamisp, and a dastur Mob perfect in the knowledge of Zend and Pahlavi, wished to correct the Pahlavi translation of the Vendidad and rectify some portions of the Zend text, which appeared to him either to have been transposed or to present useless repetitions. He began explaining to young Parsi theologians the works of Zoroaster, which the Mobeds read every day without understanding them. An enslaved people who for a long time practiced 1,000 ceremonies, the sense and reason of which they were ignorant of, would naturally fall into innumerable abuses. This was what Darab, more learned than the population 101 ever, was attached to this fact. But in 1746 another Iranian, Jamshed, and some Mobeds adopted the date accepted by the Persian Zoroastrians, and took the name of Cadmus. Others, observed. The purifications were multiplied, the Zen text was inundated with Pahlavi commentaries, often very inconsistent. Darab at first attempted the way of instruction. But he found a powerful adversary in the person of Mansurji, the chief of the party who did not like reform, and himself the son of a Mobed. Another subject of division animated them again, one against the other. Darab had for his father Caius, of whom I have spoken before, who had received from Dastur Jamisp the first smatterings of astronomy, according to the principles of Ulobeg. This Dastur Mobed having been perfected since then under another Parsi come from Kerman about 36 years ago, showed by the tables of Ulobeg that the Nowruz, the first day of the year, ought to be advanced by a month, and that consequently there had been an error till then. Letter of the Dasturs of Yezd, dated me the 22nd of the month Aban, of the year of Yezdezerd, 1742, AD, and brought by the Parsi Aspendiar, confirmed the discovery of Caius, but did not tend to protect him from the hatred of his compatriots. It went so far that Darab, 16 or 17 years ago, was obliged to withdraw to Daman amongst the Portuguese, and Caius to Cambay among the English. When I arrived at Surat, almost all the Parsis of India followed the party of Mansurji because he was rich and powerful. Darab, whose knowledge was recognized even by his adversaries, had some disciples who, in the sequel, showed themselves more freely when the authority of Mansurji had been lowered at Surat with that of the Dutch, whose agent he was. 102. The Parsis, the rest of the community, were called Shahanshahis, and preserved the ancient system. Little by little the number of the adherents of Jamshed now increased. It should be noticed that it was in Surat that the schism among the Parsis first took place, and for some time the harmonious relations between the two did not suffer by it. But two respectable men, Manjurji Karsheji Seth, of the Shahanshahi sect, and Danjisha Manjisha, of the Kadmai sect, managed literally to ignite the powder in spite of their benevolent intentions. In order to get some enlightenment, Danjisha Manjisha sent to Persia at his own expense a priest from Baruch, Kavas Rustam Jalal. Born at Baruch in 1733, this man was well versed in the Arabic and Persian languages. For 12 years he remained in Persia and Turkey, visited Yezd, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Constantinople, and returned to Surat in 1780. During his sojourn in Persia he had obtained an audience with Kirim Khan. Some months before his return, Danjisha Manjisha had come to Bombay, and had there founded the Kadmai sect under the auspices of Dadist, one of the most influential men of the time. Mullah Kavas followed his patron to Bombay and was appointed Dastur of the Adishbiram, erected population 103 by Dadist himself, Dadabhai Nasarwanji, for the Kadmai sect, which he consecrated on the 29th of September, 1783. The following year he quitted Bombay and settled in Hyderabad, in the Deccan, where he was honoured with the friendship of the Nizam. He remained there till his death, which took place in 1802, Parsi Prdkdsh, p. 92. The Kadmai sect continued to flourish in Bombay, when, at the commencement of the century, rose the great dispute of the Kabaisa, that is to say, the famous month by which the Kadmis were in advance of the Shahanshahis, Parsi Prdkdsh, pages 62, 198, 863, 867, and c. Mullah Firaz, one son of Mullah Kavas, and another one Mullah Firaz succeeded his father Mullah Kavas as Dastur of the Kadmis, 1802, when hardly 8 years old he had accompanied Mullah Kavas to Persia and had learned Persian and Arabic. In 1786 he wrote in Persian a curious recital of his voyage, Dirikkurd Manjumai. In 1830 he published the Ava Hedin to refute the arguments of Dastur Adalji Durabji Sanjana. The governor of Bombay, Mr. Jonathan Duncan, engaged him to teach Persian, and to translate the Desatir. Mr. Duncan having died, Mullah Firaz continued his work in concert with Mr. William Erskine, and finished it in 1819. He died in 1830, Parsi Prakash, p. 229, and bequeathed his collection of books in Zend, Pahlavi, and C. to the Kadmai community. J. The library which contains them is we situate in Fort, and bears his name. O to Mullah 104. The Parsis Tingished priest, Fardunji Marazbanji, constituted themselves the champions of the Kadmai sect, while the mass of the people, guided by Karsheji Manokji Shraf, grouped themselves under the patronage of the pious Dastur of the Shahanshahis, Adalji Durabji Sanjana, and clung to the date observed by the Parsis since their arrival in India. Meetings were organized to which learned Moguls were invited, in order to offer explanations, and, if possible, to terminate the discussion. The newspapers were full of virulent articles, pamphlets appeared in great numbers, and the people in some cases seemed disposed to settle the question by the right of might, an irrefutable argument. The Shahanshahis maintained that the Firaza poem on the conquest of India by the English, the George Nama, which was terminated and published in 1837 by his nephew and successor, Dastur Rostamji Kaikobatji. On the death of the latter, 1854, Parsi Prakash, p. 635, the Kadmis combined to found a madrasa which they called Mullah Firaz, Parsi Prakash, p. 647. One Adalji Durabji Sanjana was esteemed for his piety and merits. He was in his time one of the first savants in Zendwi and Pahlavi. He was equally perfect in Sanskrit. Owe to him several works on the Majdiani religion, amongst others a book entitled Korhi Viajak, which brought forth in reply the Ava Hedin of Mullah Firaz. He died in 1847, Parsi Prakash, p. 495. Population 105 Zoroastrian religion admitted a month's intercalation at the end of a period of 120 years, and that at the time of the fall of the Persian Empire there had indeed been one intercalation during their sojourn in Khorasan, but once they were in India this usage had been abandoned, hence the backwardness by 1 month from the computation of the Cadmus. The latter declared on the other hand that the intercalation was forbidden in the Zoroastrian calendar, that it was only meant for political emergencies, and that this mode of calculation had never been practiced in Khorasan. Modern learning has brought this vexed question within its true limits. Mr. Karshedji Rustamji of the Kadmai sect, known by his study of the Zoroastrian religion, has proved, or rather has attempted to prove, in a work on the computation of Yezdezerd, that the Shahanshahis and the Cadmus were both in error, 1870. The Cadmus were wrong in denying that the Parsi New Year commenced on the 2ist of March, for from a more exact knowledge of the language of the Avesta, and the deciphering of Pahlavi coins, it is demonstrated that the Zoroastrian religion admitted the intercalation and the Shahanshahis were equally wrong, for, since the downfall of the 106th the Parsis Persian Empire, there had been no intercalation as they affirmed. The opinion of the Cadmus, in accordance with the date accepted by the Zoroastrians of Persia, which proves that there had been no intercalation after the fall of the national dynasty, is absolutely correct, but as the intercalation was not ordered by the Zoroastrian religion, it appears that both sides were wrong in the controversy of the Kabaisa. The greatest disputes had arisen from this religious quarrel, scenes of surprising violence had resulted from it. For instance, in Baruch, 1782–1783, a certain Hamaji Jamshedji had struck a pregnant woman and been condemned to death, others got off with mere fines. In the heat of the disputes families became divided, marriages between Cadmus and Shahanshahis were very rare. At present most of the difficulties have been smoothed down. It happens sometimes that the husband and wife belong to different sects. In that case the children invariably belong to the father's section. If there are most offensive epithets were interchanged between Cadmus and Shahanshahis, such as that of Kurigar, Kurai, bracelets, bangles, and Gar, workman, a term of contempt carrying with it an idea of weakness. The children of the two sects pursued one another in the streets, insulting one another. This was hardly 50 years ago. Population 107. No appreciable differences, the pronunciation alone being at times not quite the same. Thus Ahu, Vohu, is pronounced Hi, Vohi among the Cadmus. There is also some difference in certain religious ceremonies, and in certain liturgical formulas. But the greatest divergence is in the mention of the month and the date of the day when the worshipper is reciting his prayers. All the feasts are observed by both the sects, but at different dates. The Shahanshahis are greatly superior in numbers to the Cadmus. The latter can hardly count more than 10 to 15,000 adherents. Many of them occupy the highest position. Mr. F. N. Patel, the members of the Dadist and Banaji families, and C. are among them. The Shahanshahis are represented by Sir Jamshedji Jajabhoy, Sir Dinshaw Manokji Peti, and many other not less respectable names. The sect of the Shahanshahis possesses in Bombay two high priests Dastur Jamaspji Minakherji and Shams ul Ulma Dastur Peshhotan Biramji Sanjana. At Pune there is only one, Dastur Hoshangji Jamaspji. The sect of the Cadmus has also high priests Dastur Karshedji Firaji Mullah Firaz, elected by the whole community, who is attached to the Dadist Adishbiram, and Dastur Karshedji Bazanji, attached to the Framji Kavasji Banaji Adishbiram. I08 The Parsis too. The Parsis, at the time of their arrival in India, had made some changes in their national costume with a view to please the princes who had received them. Thus we note the resemblance of the Angarakha and the turban of the men, and of the saris of the women, with the dress of the Hindus of Gujarat. Unwin Brothers, Limited, The Gresham Press, Woking and London. MS 45573. The University of California Library.